Hey everybody, welcome back to a very special episode of Human Reaction. We are glad to have you here at your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics, where it's always our mission to arm you with the tools you need to cut through media misdirection and resist the mono narrative. We've all just eaten a 100 milligram weed gummy and we are ready to entertain you. Woo! With a very special guest in studio today, our friend Liam McCollum. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. It was good to hang out with you this weekend.
Likewise, we got a lot of good time in, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. And a lot to talk about. And apparently you guys were watching the news the whole time, so you're up to date and know the media spin more than we do.
Oh, yeah.
You'll have to fill us in on how everything was perceived from your part, because it was very different being on the ground, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I can imagine. Because I was getting your guys's, sending me stuff, and then also just seeing how it was being framed outside, and also just how the conservative media was framing it and everything. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of see the difference of the dynamic there. And
for those that might not be aware, we are going to be talking about the Libertarian National Convention, which, if you were living under a rock, you might not have known was happening. Boy, quite an event. We're going to go through all the highlights, our takeaways, some of the interesting things that have happened as a result of that, as well as, kind of getting into the nominees and all that stuff.
But before we get going with that, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, hit that notification bell so when our videos come up, you see it on YouTube. Leave us a review on Spotify. We need more of those. We got a lot of Spotify listeners, but not as many reviews as we could probably get. And of course, give us that 5-star. Thanks to our members, our newest supporting member, Justin. Thank you, buddy. And don't forget to go to humanreactionpod.com where you can get a cool shirt. I mean, you won't have pecs like that, but you'll have something like that, for your shirt.
You got to pay extra for the pecs.
Hat. Yeah, or that hat. I was trying to draw attention to his pecs. I mean, come on. Look at those things.
Sorry, I took that from you.
He's hitting the bench. You can tell.
And also join our Discord where it has been rowdy in there, particularly because of Adam.
but not just that. I mean, we had some new questions this week and lots of different discussions. It's been awesome.
Yeah, but just a lot of conversation, largely because you guys were on the ground interviewing people and sending us all the inside scoop on everything. And then we also have just dope memes that covered the event as well, where we have libertarian ideas, and it's just a beautiful picture of a beautiful man named Dave Smith wearing a Ron Paul shirt, and then libertarian candidates. And if you've been on the internet, you know what's going on there.
All right. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thune at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com. This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link. Well, let's get into it. So, Liam, why don't you frame up the context of this a little bit? Because there's a lot of inside baseball and dynamics at play within the Libertarian Party that people who aren't in the party or very close to it would really understand. So why don't you draw the battle lines for us?
Yeah, so I got involved in the Mises Caucus about 4 or 5 years ago now. And the Mises Caucus strategy, I think, it really started after Sarwark's third term or during it.
And who is that?
Nick Sarwark was the former chair of the Libertarian Party. He was considered a pragmatist.
And a CIA asset.
Also, there are theories that he might be a CIA asset.
Seriously?
Yes.
There's theories.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a connection.
If I was a CIA asset, I would do what he was doing.
But
prove it.
But basically, so this started with Nick Sarwark, and then I would say really, the Mises Caucus existed during Joe Jorgensen's campaign, but people really started to get interested in the party and actually focusing on the mission after Joe Jorgensen completely neglected to address COVID sufficiently. She was really bad on COVID policy. She hardly addressed it, and when when she did talk about it, it was things like, we need to loosen FDA policy, allow drugs to come through and stuff. She wasn't talking about lockdown. She wasn't talking about mandates. And there was also this kind of spirit in the pragmatist segment of the party that rejected Ron Paul. They would say that Ron Paul is racist. They would refer back to the Ron Paul newsletters during the campaign where people thought that Ron Paul wrote these letters.
It's an old hit job.
Yes, it's
on Ron Paul. Forever.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's also just a lot of like bending the knee to a lot of the woke ideology, the DEI, ESG type of stuff that was existing within that wing of the party that I think got a lot of people in your camp, or that I think we all kind of align ourselves with that camp.
Yeah.
That it got us kind of riled up, and we're just like, this is not libertarianism.
Yeah,
right?
it's like half messaging angle, half like cultural way of talking about things that was sending, signals saying, hey, we're not part of the people who are most concerned about this. We're part of the people who are supportive, but we just want different means of accomplishing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And they were also hostile to people like Jeff Deist. They were hostile to Tom Woods.
The Mises Institute overall.
Yep, exactly. So that entire segment of libertarianism. So the Mises Caucus strategy was to bring that back in, bring the liberty movement into the Libertarian Party, because we all acknowledge, you guys are a part of this movement. You are in the liberty movement, but you aren't necessarily in the party.
Yeah.
So it was like, how can we make the party attractive to people like you? People like Ron Paul. And in Reno, 2 years ago at the Libertarian Party convention, we invited Ron Paul to speak, but the official party wouldn't because, again, they were hostile to Ron Paul. So we actually invited him to the Mises Caucus Bash. And this weekend, thankfully, because of Angela McCardle and the fact that we were able to elect her and take over the party in Reno, we had this moment where we were actually bringing Ron Paul back home. And that's kind of like, I think that's the really big takeaway of what we were trying to accomplish with the Mises Caucus takeover is that, Ron Paul ran for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination in 1988. David Nolan, the founder of the party, Murray Rothbard, they all backed the Ron Paul campaign. David Nolan and Murray Rothbard are dead now, but Ron Paul is still alive. And it's like bringing that generation back, because after Ron Paul went into the GOP and had his presidential campaigns, essentially the party was taken over by this segment that we're talking about, the woke segment that is adopting regime talking points. And so I think really what was so significant about this upcoming or this last convention was that Ron Paul was there, and that was Angela McCardle's doing. That was the success of the Mises Caucus. And the entire convention room, you would agree, standing ovation for him.
Oh,
everyone
my gosh.
loved him in there.
It was so heartwarming. For someone who was brought into the liberty movement in the first place by the Ron Paul revolution, it felt like a full circle moment. Knowing the context, knowing the history of how he was sort of, kept at arm's length by the party, to be there for that was really, really special. And
he opened up the speech with saying that he is a life-sustaining member and he paid his dues in gold and silver back in the day. So it just felt right. And I've seen Ron Paul speak 3 or 4 times now, I think maybe 5. And he was sharper, wittier, and he's 88 and he's just he was meant to be there and you could just feel it.
Yeah. The energy was really good.
It's a big symbolic victory too of establishing where we're at right now. Also just showing a major change in strategy where you're inviting people like Vivek, RFK, Donald Trump to come in and speak and try to kind of win you guys over or whatever.
Right. And that was the other major battle line that was drawn between the Mises Caucus and the pragmatists, right? Is Angela McCardle's strategy was to try to open up the Libertarian Party to, this thing that we've been talking about on this show for over a year now, which is greater political influence through dealing and working with and being strategic with the way we can interact with other major parties. But the Prags had other ideas on that, right?
Yeah, so I would say that that's another thing that really differentiates the two is I would say that the Libertarian Party or the Mises Caucus is more about accepting realities and adapting strategy to that reality. The Mises Caucus is willing to come out front and say, we are not going to win the presidential campaign. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. We're not going to win the presidential election. We probably aren't even going to take a gubernatorial seat. It's just far off if that's ever going to happen. So the idea is how can we impact culture? How can we move the needle? And I think what we did this weekend, I mean, we saw the success of that strategy, in my opinion. We had Vivek and Clint Russell on the stage together with Dave Smith moderating, and you could kind of see how Vivek is playing an entirely different game than we are, but we're better off for it because we're able to tell the truth, but also move Vivek's audience in our direction a little bit. Like, there were times when Israel came up in the conversation, and you could tell Vivek had guardrails. He wasn't going there. Yeah. So he would move, he would pivot away from it. Whereas, like, we can stay true to our message, we can speak the truth, and then the people who are Vivek supporters who are watching it observe that happening. And a few of them are going to start becoming Clint Russell supporters, Dave Smith supporters. And I guess, like, that's just a little microcosm of, I think, the strategy is just that because we acknowledge political realities and we're not invested in electioneering as much as we are about promoting libertarian ideas, we're actually willing to go out and reach others. It's simultaneously the most radical strategy because we're based in, like, Rothbardian, Austrian, Ron Paulian ideas, but it's also the most pragmatic because we're talking to people.
It's actually pragmatic.
It's actually pragmatic.
Like the pragmatist.
Sweet irony there, isn't there? Well, and it was really interesting to see the success that you're referring to because Vivek very clearly had messaging targeted at appealing to libertarians. RFK came with a very, constitutionally focused address as well. Trump obviously was coming to address and, actually ask the libertarians to nominate him.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
Which was unexpected to be.
I expected him to say, hey, we need your votes. But he literally begged for our nomination there. Like he said, nominate me tomorrow. Yeah. And then that's really what got booze. That's when everyone erupted.
Yeah, for sure.
But I will say that, like, that goes to the point, like, because we're not concerned about electioneering, we're not concerned about increasing our percentage. We're more concerned about, like, reaching audiences and changing, because I mean they're connected. Like, culture or politics is downstream from culture. So if we can get Vivek supporters to listen to Clint Russell talking about the Federal Reserve, we can move the needle. And I think the most interesting takeaway from this weekend was I was scrolling through, like, a Politico article, and there's this paragraph where it's saying Donald Trump supporters were chanting, "We want Trump," and then they would be drowned out by "and the Fed" chants. And it's like many of those Trump supporters are going to look at that, and then they might find themselves with an "and the Fed" copy. Ron Paul's book, "And the Fed." They might read it. They might become Mises Institute supporters. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're in it for the long game. The Mises Caucus strategy, it's called the Decentralized Revolution strategy. It's all about accepting realities and trying to move culture and trying to build trust. And I'd say that Angela followed through with that despite the presidential candidate.
Well, there's also an element in playing a role in shifting the Overton window of kind of all the different camps of, like, we don't necessarily need the right wing to be Scott Horton necessarily, but we want to see them take more of that Tucker Carlson path and that he's taken on the foreign policy angle. So, like, even though they're not as good as Scott Horton on this, but, like, they're getting closer and closer, and hopefully the libertarians can facilitate a role in shifting that Overton window.
Yeah, if we could get the Overton window between the GOP and the LP to be Vivek to Dave Smith, I mean, that's exactly what we need for this country.
Yeah. I think that's victory. So one of the things I've saw a lot about it is how contentious it was. And I'm hearing the contentiousness of the speakers, but it seems like there was more to it based upon what you guys were telling us that was happening in the background that isn't really covered when it comes to the motions and delay tactics and things like that. So do we want to dive into that first?
Let's do it. I mean, the one thing I was struck by as an observer, right? You were there as a delegate. I was there just as media. So standing in the back of the room, it was obvious to me, even without the sort of inside baseball context of what was going on, that as soon as Angela gavelled the opening of the convention, there wasn't a second before the first motion was brought to change something, suspend a rule, whatever it was. And it was just a continuous onslaught for hours. And it was not long before the business that was supposed to be done was woefully behind schedule.
So we didn't move on to any substantial. I think we adjourned on Friday without finishing the credential report. I think we opened up Saturday still doing the credential report.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Which you're hypothesizing was like a particular tactic by a faction?
Yeah, so there are a few tweets that I posted. Captain in Capistan said that...
I'll pull them up.
Let me get to it.
We can see it together on the big screen here.
Right here.
Because so the Prags were playing dirty, and they ultimately won in the end with the presidential candidate. And I think this is why, is the Mises Caucus spent all business Friday trying to keep a bunch of Prags from being able to vote and failed. This pushed business back so far that a bunch of Mises Caucus people had to leave before we even finished voting on president and vice president.
So to be clear, what's going on here is like a couple of states had extra delegates that they wanted to admit to be legitimate voting delegates on the floor of the LNC.
Okay. There
were some discrepancies about maybe how they were credentialed through their state delegations at their state conventions that had raised questions around that. And I believe it was the mission of the Mises Caucus to keep these people who were dubiously verified from voting, right? But the Prags obviously wanted them to vote because those were going to be important numbers for them when it came time to vote for president and vice president.
There was a concern
to stack it at the last second.
Exactly, and there was a concern that these delegates had been nominated they had been nominated in violation of the state's bylaws, and in turn, they would also be violating the national's bylaws if they went through with those delegates.
Got it.
And if that is the case, we would be vulnerable to lawsuits from the Republicans and Democrats if we actually went through with a convention where people were seated in violation of our national bylaws.
I think if we want to pull up that clip of my interview with Dave Smith, he pretty well sums up the bit of chaos that opened the convention on Friday morning.
What is the most important message that the LP is trying to communicate to non-party libertarians and the general public here this week?
Well, the message I'm getting right now is that democracy sucks. I mean, this is just a nightmare. Why can't someone just be dictator of this thing?
Right.
But aside from that, I think the message that we're trying to get out is that there is a different way. There's a different way to look at politics. There's a different way to organize society. We are currently living through an experiment in big tyrannical government. It's a disaster. Everybody knows it's a disaster. They're all trying to kind of cope with that fact and be like, well, no, if our guy just got in, maybe it wouldn't be such a disaster. And I think our point is that by its very nature, having a central government as big and powerful as the one we have today is always going to lead to outcomes like this. And the reason why we're such a successful country is because we were started on the loose concept of limited, constitutional republic. We should move back in that direction.
So at the end there, he kind of gets to the broader mission of really what the LP is trying to accomplish overall. But the beginning, he really does highlight how chaotic it was out there.
And we later found out after we adjourned that there was a deliberate strategy to be dilatory by the Prags, knowing that many Mises Caucus members would leave. So this is a message by Jonathan Casey, who I believe used to be, he just resigned yesterday, but he was the Classical Liberal Caucus chair. And he's saying, emergency, get to the mics and fuck shit up. Stall, stall, stall. Point of information, personal inquiry, air conditioning too cold, anything to stall. So basically, and this is what we were observing from day one, and it happened throughout. So people would go up to the mic and they were just saying the craziest stuff, just trying to delay business. And ultimately it led to us voting on the vice presidential candidate at 1 a.m.?
The convention adjourned at 1 a.m. on Monday morning after starting at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. Well, and I think we'll get there. But
so he's the chair of the Classical Liberal Caucus.
Yeah,
so that's that's like the brand of the what'd you call them? Not the Progs.
The Prags.
Prags.
Yeah.
Progs is a different one. The Proles. Got it.
So
Okay.
yeah, it was a highly contentious experience and really eye-opening for me because I didn't really know what to expect at all. Did you see that coming? Was that something that the Mises Caucus folks knew was going to be a tactic for the Prags?
I would imagine so in Reno, they did a lot of dilatory things. That was actually a common thing that we were yelling, dilatory. I swear I heard it 5,000 times in Reno. But that was because they were really trying to prevent Angela McCardle and the takeover. So I would say they were actually a lot more hostile and it was more blatant in Reno. There was a famous video of Nick Sarwark bumping into someone and pretending that he was getting pushed. And
I remember that.
Yeah. So that happened. But this was actually, if this was intentional, it was a lot more strategic and coordinated. And ultimately, they just played dirtier than us.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's ZESTYBEV.com. So I guess we'll come back to some of the convention business and stuff, but let's dig into like some of these visits from all the characters that we've talked about. The reasons that I feel like this convention was particularly meaningful and honestly a good thing for the message of liberty in spite of the mayhem that ensued as well. So starting with the debate between Vivek Ramaswamy and Clint Russell, the presumed VP nominee at that time, with Dave Smith moderating.
Or actually, before we go into the clip, do we want to preface it up? Like, how was the energy for Vivek going into it? Like what was the general sentiment towards Vivek? Because we've been very positive of Vivek on this podcast, right?
Well, this is the fan club.
We are the fan club.
We're
right?
the Vivek fan club.
But like, what was the general sentiment towards him and kind of the lead up to all this?
So you were in the room before, so did you watch the Larry Sharp debate? I guess for a little background, what happened right before this debate is Clint Russell was debating Larry Sharp, who was the other vice presidential candidate, and Clint apparently handedly won. Like it was obvious. I think we were out to eat at that point, so we missed it. So we kind of missed the energy of the room. We showed up right before this, but there were times. I think there were times during this where Vivek actually got cheered. He did.
During his speech, he definitely did.
I watched the entire speech live. He had a live feed on his Twitter.
Yeah, I think during the speech I forgot about that. They were supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was on the media riser and I had a great view and I had a direct feed of audio into my headphones so I could hear everything, which the sound was tough in there. It was kind of difficult to make out all the detail just standing in the room as an observer, what all was being said, which I think is sort of important, especially once we get to Trump's appearance, because it was so loud in there. Mm-hmm. But I thought the energy was really good. I thought there was a lot of support for what Vivek was saying. I think a lot of libertarians were probably keeping what he was saying at arm's length, knowing, he's offering some platitudes because he's here to try to win us over. And he did successfully do that. There were a couple of moments, though, where he started to go into issues that the libertarians were not favorable of, and you could tell immediately when the room turned on him. And he, just being the skilled orator and the quick wit that he is, he was able to work back from that place of getting boos to actually getting cheers again. So it was very
the moment
interesting.
I noticed from watching the live feed was it was very his typical messaging, which is very libertarian adjacent, right? With ending the deep state, et cetera, blah blah blah, all that stuff, right? But the moment that I noticed the crowd turned on him, and I wouldn't even say it's turned on him. It's just like there was a momentary lapse, which I think he was expecting.
Yeah,
he wouldn't. Is when he said, "I want to work with you guys to help you get your foot in the door at the administration.
Right.
I want to get you into positions of power to actually be able to wield it.
So
therefore."
That sounds terrible. That sounds horrible.
Therefore, work with us.
Right.
And then that's when the booze came, right? Like some people I think were like, yeah, let's work. Like there was some cheers in there, but then a lot of people are just like, no, we're not working with the enemy. Or
and I wonder how much your average LP member really tracked the Republican primary and really knows what Vivek's about. And that's probably one of the key differences.
Yeah,
right?
I would say that the Prags probably had less knowledge about him, whereas like people who tuned into like Dave Smith and Clint Russell, like
and the Human Reaction podcast.
Right. Vivek actually went on Dave Smith's show and Clint's show.
Multiple times.
Yeah,
he sold himself well to libertarians, and he's obviously fluent in the philosophy to some degree.
Well, one of my favorite moments in the debate, and we'll get to the debate here, because first he had a speech and then there was the debate. One of my favorite moments was actually him saying that he's a Hayek guy, and Dave Smith being like, "Well, have you ever read Mises?" and Vivek said, "Well, okay, arguably." Mises is more based, but my first love that got me into this when I was 19 was Hayek.
Yeah. So I think
if you're a law student and you read Constitutional Liberty,
exactly,
it's a very compelling case because it's a fundamentally a legal case, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to Misesian praxeology is just not going to be as compelling unless you are coming from a very different place.
Yeah. So to see where the crowd's at, I think we could actually like contrast Vivek's performance with RFK's. Like when we saw RFK, that was Friday. I'd say like the reception was. Like he was pretty boring. Like no one really stood up. There were no standing ovations or anything. And he didn't really work the crowd. I was standing about from this viewpoint. I was really close to the stage. And RFK I think he was in really bright light and they turned it off when Vivek got on stage, but he was reading a teleprompter at the bottom and he never diverted from it. Vivek comes out and it's immediately conversational with the audience, and the audience starts shouting things at him and he's playing off of it. And he's like, I think someone said that Donald Trump was a war criminal, and he effectively said, he's going to be out here, save that for him, but please keep an open mind. Like, he was playing off of it, and I think that he really did win the audience over.
He showed that he was listening to the actual people he was there to try to persuade, which was exactly the right call from the Trump campaign, to bring in someone like that with that amount of talent.
Totally. Well, and he was also able to get out there and kind of feel around for what the hot button issues were going to be, both positively and negatively, and probably filter some of that back to the Trump campaign so that they could tailor their speech to, what was really going to land. And obviously not everything was going to from the get-go, but you're right. RFK's address was very much like a constitutional lecture. And honestly, like, I didn't mind it. In fact, I quite appreciated it. I mean, it felt like a historic moment. I mean, in the room with a Kennedy, it was kind of interesting. And I thought that he did a good job of communicating well the ways that his platform and his views align with libertarianism, and they do in very large part. Obviously, we miss on some pretty important issues as well, but Vivek was able to connect in a deeper way.
So we have this great clip of from the Dave Smith, Clint Russell,
the quote unquote debate. It was more of a discussion. It wasn't like a super contentious debate. There was actually moments where Clint was getting standing ovations and Vivek went and fist bumped him. But I think this clip right here actually, I think, showcases the libertarian grievances with the Republican Party.
They promised to defend the Constitution. When? I'm gonna die before they do it. I mean, this is my deep-seated concern. They also talk about limited government. They talk about ending the wars. They talk about bringing our troops home. When? It's not happening. So the reason the Libertarian Party is as viable as it is, the reason that Donald Trump and yourself and even RFK are here this weekend is because the election margins are so thin that you guys need us. And I appreciate that you're willing to come and talk to us, because there's not real animus, particularly between you and I. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. But there is a tremendous amount of animosity between myself and the GOP, who has ran around talking as if they're Ron Paul and then governing as if they're John McCain.
Cut it there, and that clip was recorded by Josie, the redheaded libertarian. I think you guys were saying you were right next to her.
Yeah,
when
so
this clip
I was
being
standing
recorded.
like right to the right of her, taking photos, and I turn around and I'm met with a crowd that is just like the whole room erupted. This was the best moment of the entire night, and like Heist comes up, daps me up, I give him a hug. You're right there, and everyone's just like, "This is crazy." And after this wraps up, I see Clint, and I go up to him, and he is just like, and he said this on the show that normally he has like stage fright, but he was just like on, and you could tell. Like, this is the moment that I think defined the energy for the rest of the convention up until the presidential election. When we showed up the following day, I think Mises had a strong presence. Like it was just like we were in lockstep. And what is interesting is after all of this, Chase Oliver basically goes out and says that he is opposed to inviting Vivek and Trump on to the convention. He's opposed to that strategy entirely. But I think what we see here is the beauty in it, right? You have so many Vivek supporters that potentially just watch that and they know that Clint is right. But Vivek, because he's playing a different game, because he's actually concerned about electioneering, he has to cater his messaging, a certain way. He can't speak the truth, but every single conservative, like populist supporter knows that Clint was right in the moment. And that is what is so cool about the Mises Caucus strategy. It's like, we're actually friends with the Vivek types. Yeah. We're going to invite them to our convention and we're going to share with him our grievance. And hopefully we can move each other closer.
Create just the tiniest amount of cognitive dissonance between feeling like very aligned with Vivek, but understanding, okay, this guy is sitting across from him, debating him, has something that's irrefutable that I'm hearing and really resonating with, and you just can't get that out of your head.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, when these guys talk to Vivek, it's pretty clear that like there's little daylight between them. Like it really does seem like Vivek's like, no, like there's like subtext. He's like, guys, what I'm trying to tell you right now is that I'm with you, and that if you if you vote for Trump likes me, and then I'll be the candidate later, and I'm friends with you guys. There's no daylight. Like, it's almost like that's what he's trying to say.
There's a lot of subtext.
Exactly.
I
There's
agree with
so
you.
much subtext, and it's like, yeah, just the idea that we have the opportunity to influence that. I mean, I think it just goes to the value of having our party.
And one of the things with that too is my understanding is, at least I was listening to Clint Russell's breakdown of it last night that he did live, or he did a YouTube premiere, and I guess one of the cabinet position that is being promised is likely to be around pardoning.
Yeah.
And so, like, having a libertarian on the major influential part for pardoning like wrongly convicted criminals, like if that ends up being the case that comes out of all this, like, whew, and Angela McCardle just like did a lot of good work, right?
If that's the one thing, right?
That
like
ends
that's
up being it.
So I interviewed Angela a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about the list of grievances that people were submitting at the time, and she said, "Free Ross is up there," and as we saw, like, he also agreed to commute the sentence of Ross. And I said, like, if that's the single thing that comes out of this convention, it's the most power and influence, the best thing the party has ever done. We negotiated that. So if we're actually able to get someone on that pardon board, like, I mean, it's just like, it's so obviously a good thing.
100%.
But what does he think about the roads?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's not Secretary of State, but it's pretty goddamn good.
It's pretty good.
So no small thing. And I wouldn't want to take away from the accomplishment of it, for sure.
For sure.
And then we had, obviously Trump did end up saying that in a speech.
He did.
Right? And then RFK came up and he had good things to say about such things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, all of the folks that were there to speak to the convention from outside of the party referenced those things, and very deliberately so. I mean, it was very clear up front that those were objectives, things that are very important to the LP. But interestingly, you had a chance to talk with Dave Smith as well about RFK and a variety of topics. But this particular segment, you were talking about why RFK wasn't going to get or didn't get the LP nomination.
Yeah, so both Trump and RFK sought the nomination on Sunday. They actually asked for us to nominate them. So you, like, in your ballot in November, you would see Donald Trump, Libertarian.
Was Donald Trump like officially sought the nomination, or was that more of a joking manner?
He asked for it,
yeah,
but
like
he
wasn't
not,
like officially on the.
He was
thing,
not.
right?
He didn't appropriately file the paperwork to be able to be nominated.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so-
because I saw his Truth Social post about it afterwards. He's like, "Well, technically, legally, I can't, but."
It did sound a little defensive on his part, though. It's like because he asked for the nomination.
He did.
And so did RFK. And like RFK, the media was doing like a slow drip of like, oh, is he going to run, like, for the last few months in the Libertarian Party convention? And I mean, he did. He showed up, and then he actually accepted the nomination in a virtual speech. So, and it looked like it was pre-recorded. So I'd imagine that was his strategy the whole time. But he goes on to, I think he got 2% of the vote of the entire room.
He got about 2% in the first round and was eliminated.
knocked off.
That's interesting. So do you think Trump's asking for the nomination was ad-libbing? Like, he was just up there and he was just like, well,
It's a
I'm
good
here, I might as
question.
well ask, and it doesn't hurt to ask, and he just went up there
And then
did.
he's just like, and I actually have the clip of that we'll get into when we get into the Trump section, but it is funny. He's like, or just take your 3%. It's just
He was
hilarious.
definitely ad-libbing that.
Yeah, it's so funny.
He did enjoy getting some dunks in on the Libertarians getting their 3%. But I wondered actually about that, if he actually maybe meant to say endorse, because obviously there's a big distinction between the two that could be meaningful going forward.
I think it was a meaningful joke.
Yeah,
It was kind of just like a joke to get the crowd kind of roaring in whatever capacity. And because it was coming after, here's all the reasons I am a libertarian, and then it goes into like, this is my ask of you, hand of friendship, nominate me, haha, funny, and then he kind of goes into the rest of his speech, right? Like I think it was part of the performance.
I could see it.
I should have shared the video with you guys, but I actually have the video. Someone did nominate him on the floor, and it got booed. Like so. I don't know if that guy was in touch with the Trump campaign and that was a strategy going in, but he was nominated, like whether it was a joke or not. And we went through the procedures. Angela asked whether he had actually filed the paperwork, and then ultimately said that it was void.
But why not RFK? Like, okay, so there's all kinds of appeals he's been making for months now to the libertarians. Obviously, they have compelling reasons to like him when it comes to COVID. A lot of COVID or vaccine skepticism amongst libertarians. He's a great messenger on Ukraine. Has done yeoman's work on trying to get the mainstream media to actually reconcile facts about Ukraine. So why not RFK? Why only 2% libertarians? Come on.
Well, and RFK was actually a member, so we know that like it was a deliberate strategy on his part, because being a member is one of the requirements to run for the candidacy.
Oh, so you filed for the Libertarian Party as a member?
He is actually a member of the Libertarian Party, and he had done it, I think.
Well,
months
and that's
before.
why Trump's wasn't official.
Exactly.
Like, that was part of his Truth Social tweet. Was his Truth Social tweet? His truth. That's part of his truth. Was him saying that he legally couldn't actually seek the nomination.
Because he can't do that while doing the Republican.
He's the Republican.
Well, and also, isn't it a rule that
jumped
the
out.
Libertarian Party can't nominate a candidate that's a member of
it
another
would have
party?
violated our bylaws.
So we couldn't ever have nominated him anyways.
That's
It
why
would
a
have
lot of
been.
us
How does that work with RFK? He's independent. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, so let's go to Liam. You interviewed Dave Smith, and you asked him why didn't RFK get the nomination. So we'll get Dave's take on here.
Well, look, I mean, if I'm just being completely honest, I think he didn't get the nomination because, look, by definition, people in the Libertarian Party are already people who don't want to compromise on what they believe in. And if they did, they'd probably be a member of one of the two major parties that wins sometimes. Yeah. And they're over here saying, we need to plant a flag in the ground and be libertarians. And he's not a libertarian. So he would have had a very tough time either way. But for me personally, and I think what was the death blow for his campaign, has been his position on the war in Gaza. If you can even call it a war when you just slaughter a captive people, but whatever that is, around here it is, look, I mean, if you saw the presidential debates for our candidates, it's unanimous. And there might be one or two people who disagree with that in that room, but it is as close to unanimous as it could be that we do not support America funding wars abroad that are not wars of necessity. They're wars of choice, from the American perspective at least, certainly wars of choice, and that are horrifically immoral. And so that's just, that stuff is not going to fly around here.
How dare you?
He's right. He's right.
Yeah, I mean, they did end up selecting a LP candidate that's pretty good on Gaza and Israel, right?
Well, then there's other things. We'll get to that. We're going to get to that.
We're going to get to that.
I'm teasing.
We want to do the
poking the bear.
We want to do Trump before we get to that.
So I think
chronologically,
this goes to an interesting point. So libertarians, Dave Smith asked libertarians in this clip, or before Trump got on stage, he pled with libertarians to be polite and like actually try to hear them out. He's coming to our convention. We're trying to influence them. Boo him when he says something bad, but otherwise
I actually have
listen.
that clip here if we want to listen to it.
Yeah.
Because this actually, in my
Dave
mind,
Smith show.
Yeah, this is just we're now the Dave Smith fan.
He's got his own podcast, but now he's got a second
clearly,
one.
this is one of the big takeaways. Is like I guess it's not really a takeaway of this, but Dave Smith is Mr. Libertarian in a lot of ways. He's got all the star power. He's on all the major shows, and I think from what you guys were saying, like it was very clear that he's like running this thing. Right?
I mean,
in a lot of ways, he's able to sway the power in such a tremendous way. Right?
Quite true, and he effectively became sort of the MC of the whole event as much as he could be. You know.
So there was a time where Dave. Just a point about him actually running the show. There was a point during business where each speaker was allotted a minute to speak. And normally, like when someone got up there and hit the minute, like they were kind of like pulled to the side, like, hey, stop. And Dave's like, someone went up to Dave and was like, hey, you passed your time. And he's like, one more thing, and then just kept going. And like, what are you going to do? Like, it's Dave Smith. He's running the thing.
Well, there's also an element here too, where like I've had multiple in recent weeks, because of this clip that we're about to play, but also his recent appearance on Tucker Carlson and Rogan, because he did all those kind of in the lead up to this. I've had multiple conservatives be like, Kyle, you're a libertarian. Have you ever heard of this Dave Smith guy?
Here.
I really like that guy. Like, it's astounding because a lot of people that I just several years ago, I would have never expected that to come out of their mouths, right? So like him doing this and what he's going to do this clip and kind of the messaging of trying to be like a unifier between, hey, the libertarians, I got a message for you, and Trump people, I got a message for you. I think super well executed, incredibly well executed here.
You know what? Okay, listen. There's broadly speaking, I think, two groups of people here. Okay? No, but I'm serious. There are members of the Libertarian Party, and and there are people who came here to support Donald Trump. Listen, I have a message for both of you individually. I hear you. To the members of the Libertarian Party, which I am also one. Guys, listen, here's my message to the libertarians here. The former president of the United States of America and the current frontrunner to be the next president is here to talk to you. We are not a bunch of college leftist sissies. We believe in free speech. So be respectful. I'm not telling you have to agree with him, and I'm not telling you have to cheer for him. But we're not having like Jordan Peterson at Berkeley event here. And the message we're sending to the world is not that we can't handle ideas that we disagree with. We are libertarians. We are constantly surrounded by ideas that we disagree with. We're in Washington, D.C., for God's sake.
Before, if you guys have anything to say about that before we do the message to the Trump supporters, because I think that's also something we should dig into.
I just appreciated how Clint Russell in his podcast last night referred to this as Dave Dad mode, which I think is so incredibly true. He's like calming the kids down. Hey, listen. Everybody be quiet.
And it was very rowdy in there. So I'm actually like standing just to the right of Dave here, and I'm taking photos behind Secret Service. It was the craziest experience of my life. Like I interviewed Dave about this point too. I was like completely surreal. And then I actually asked him about his take after the fact, because for anyone who watched that Trump speech, no one remained calm. Like from the get-go.
Not even a little.
Yeah, from the get-go, it was almost a riot.
I saw someone getting dragged out.
Yes.
Unruly children, the Libertarian Party.
Perhaps.
Even if you have debt. But that's what leadership is. Leadership is trying to restrain that, right? I mean, like he's really trying to apply like the consciousness to the moment and wake people up to the overall context, which is often missing in circumstances like this.
Well, I think also some important context. I think a lot of people think it was mainly just libertarians that were causing this. What happened immediately before everyone everyone got in their seats and people came on stage is Trump supporters actually filled the reserved spots in the convention hall, and the reserved spots were for delegates who had paid for packages. So they were supposed to be libertarians up front, and somehow Trump supporters got up there.
They were taking the reserve signs off the seats.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And they were taking them off.
Oh, and this is what Laura Loomer was tweeting out about. She was
Correct.
making a big ruckus about libertarians are kicking out Trump supporters out of good seats.
Right. So immediately
Laura Loomer was wrong about something? Is that what you're kidding me?
I would never expect it.
So it immediately starts hostile, and the libertarians were like upset from the get-go because the Trump supporters were in their spots. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just libertarians causing it.
And I think because as he goes on to the message to the Trump supporters, I think it was very wise for him to kind of key in on the issues. These are where there's a Venn diagram that overlaps on us. He didn't do the contentious issues going in here, but it's just
he didn't left brain it and say that we think that like all drugs should be legal. He was like actually being diplomatic and political and savvy.
And I think this is actually important to understand the Mises Caucus strategy too. So the Mises Caucus strategy, it's based in human action and praxeology and understanding of it and ordinal preferences. So the idea is like in Austrian economics, we acknowledge that humans rank things ordinally.
It just means you don't have a number for it, right? You just know what's on top. Between Crest and Arm & Hammer gum, you're going to I have a preference here. I can't tell you it's 10 times better. I just know it's better. And I express my internal motivations of how I feel about the gum that I purchase with my external action in that I buy Crest and not Arm & Hammer.
Yeah. And the result of that is that we're sort of populist because we're like, what we're trying to observe is what are the hot button issues now that are like, that we can actually reach people. Like who are the most reachable people? Like if we're just having a finger on the pulse of the culture, who are the most reachable people? And I would say the Mises Caucus understands that we're not in competition with the left. Like we are not going to win over Democrats. Like it's just, we're not in competition with the same way.
You're also just not the same culture at all.
But,
right.
But conservatives, like we are in competition with Trump over the conservative base. If I go to my grandfather, who's a Fox News watching grandpa, who loves Trump, and I say the FBI building should be demolished and it should be abolished, he'd probably agree with me. Donald Trump is moving the FBI building to Washington, D.C. He's not abolishing it. But he's more likely to agree with me on that, my grandfather. So what the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus strategy is like trying to identify those issues, the top issues that there is overlap so that we can move the Overton window in our direction. So I'd say, as Dave's going to get into, it's wars, it's the Fed, taxes, it's stuff like that. And whereas like the Chase Oliver types, like they very much are just like, it just gets autistic, and it's like, who's going to build the roads? It's like, we should decrease taxes. And it's just like not exciting. It's not sexy at all. Whereas we're like, how can we convince people?
Yeah.
And just to be clear for people who might be like not understanding the terminology, autistic is a term very flagrantly used to describe libertarians.
It's
very
with
common.
love.
We've all
It's
been
meant
called
with love.
autistic here.
Yes, we're not making fun of
we
anyone.
might be the least autistic of the libertarians sitting in this room right now.
And that's why you're not
Liam
party
talks
members.
to
I think.
girls sometimes. I mean, come on.
Yeah, look at him.
well, and Dave Smith, like his thing is like, my role in this movement is to make libertarians a little less autistic and the broader public a little more autistic.
And it's very true.
Yeah.
Make them cool. Like there's an element of just like, you want it to be cool. And that's going to attract people. And if you're just nerding out about like obscure subjects, it's not inspiring. It's not cool. Like normal people don't really care about being a part of that.
Yeah.
And in this way, if it can be exciting and you can be part of the broader culture and not just so insulated all the time too, and we can build coalitions and we can do these things, then you start to integrate with everybody.
Exactly.
And you can actually start to move the needle on adjacent groups to you, right?
Yep.
Right, and that's the big role of being a comedian, right? Is that being funny is be cool, right? It's in a male friend group. It's the funniest guy who has the most clout.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the guy. What were the other characteristics? The guy who's right all the time,
Or like the
That's not-
athlete or something like that.
Right. Those
Yeah.
aren't the categories. It's who can make the other guys laugh.
Yeah.
So that's why, and there's just a natural charisma that he has that he brings to the table, and that's why he's seen as such a leader in the movement.
And we've been gassing up this clip.
We really have.
So yeah, here's the second part of the two messages that he wanted to get across.
And here's my message to the Donald Trump supporters who are here. You came to the Libertarian Party National Convention, and we're libertarians around these parts.
I like how it
So
goes
let
southern
me tell
right there.
you a little bit about what we
Southern.
believe in case you're not sure. Here's what we believe. Donald Trump, as President of the United States of America, was framed for treason by his own deep state. And those people belong in jail.
God, I wish he ran.
Lock them up.
Lock them up.
It is an absolute crime against our nation that the intelligence agencies that supposedly work for the president would dare frame a presidential candidate. But they crossed a whole nother line when they framed the sitting commander-in-chief, and not one of them has paid for that. And that is unacceptable.
I imagine the Prags didn't like that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Did or didn't?
Didn't.
Around these parts, we are truly America first. We believe in no foreign adventurism. We are strict non-interventionists. The proxy wars of choice following 20 years of disastrous terror wars in Ukraine and in Israel are absolutely inexcusable, and America should have no part of either of them. We are $34 trillion in debt.
Chanting "End the wars." I mean, he really that was a masterwork. in communications right there.
Well, and it's also just he's using their language as well. Like, and that's important to be able to blend people together is actually to kind of like combine the language and be like, see, we're not, there's a Venn diagram here and we exist pretty close to each other actually.
And it's important to see the categories of America First as an empty box that you have to fill with content.
Right.
And that theory of language that says that this is a power game and a rhetorical game in order to say this is what this word means that we're constantly playing. That's the role that, I mean, when we talk about foreign policy on this podcast or when libertarians are trying to convince somebody, you're in the role of trying to say this is what it really means to be an American, a conservative, a libertarian, America First, whatever those words are.
And it's trying to ground populism in principle, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is not normal. Populism doesn't instinctively that way.
Yeah.
Don't tell
1776 will commence again.
Yes.
Well, don't tell the Prags about populism. They got really angry about that word.
Well, that really like
scurry.
So you mentioned like you're pretty sure that Chase Oliver and the Prags weren't a fan of his comment and him being diplomatic about Donald Trump, right? Like Dave's someone who has said that Donald Trump is a war criminal who should be in prison.
Yeah,
right?
he said like all the presidents are war criminals, and Trump's not an exception to that.
But he's being diplomatic here because he's trying to convince MAGA supporters. Like Chase, right after Donald Trump speaks, in his press conference, says, first of all, this event shouldn't have happened at all. No one's going to vote for Trump. He should be in prison. And then he says no real libertarian would ever serve in a Trump administration, because Trump goes on to make a promise that he's going to put a libertarian in his cabinet. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, if Donald Trump put Scott Horton as Secretary of State, it'd be the best thing he ever did in his entire life.
Would just be incredible.
But I mean, that's just ridiculous too. You can find article after article about how the Trump administration was full of people from the Stand Together Network and the Koch Foundation. Mm-hmm. All those people did that not because they were no longer libertarians or they were no longer principled, but because they were like, hey, I can make a marginal difference. That's what it means. I mean, it'd be like, it's just like saying Ron Paul's not a libertarian because he was running as a Republican. It's just ridiculous. It's
it almost makes the point that, that brand of libertarianism, of libertarians that would say that, are more interested in just being contrarian and being this third party that doesn't accept any of the bullshit, that isn't actually interested in making a real difference.
They're more interested in the social vibe of being the outsider. Ooh, he's the quirky outsider.
Right.
That ends up being what that vibe is.
Which is actually where I think that brand of libertarianism goes woke, right? Because that's the core ethos of wokeism, is we're all these outcasts and we don't have a group unless we're our own group. And so they create this sort of outcast mentality that is pervasive and completely not useful at all.
I think there's some psychology that definitely maps with that.
It could be that's also what's acceptable at a cocktail party, right? And it's much more acceptable for your average cocktail party to be like, yeah, Donald Trump. I mean, he's dumb, right? He's so dumb and silly. He's got small hands, right? You don't go in there and just be like, it's really true. Populism and how the American working class isn't being heard, right? That's not, you don't say that at a cocktail party.
Yeah, and I just get the feeling and this is probably assuming intentions or whatever, but I get the feeling that because they're worried about cocktail parties and all of that, they actually hate the idea of identifying with middle America. Yeah. They don't like the idea of the libertarian label being associated with people like my grandfather.
The country bumpkins and stuff.
Yeah.
Because they would rather be engaged in elitist philosophical conversations. But I'm, my grandfather and people like him, they aren't very into theory. They don't really quite understand the intricacies of policy or whatever. But because they're populists, they follow the wave. They follow the narrative, the ethos of it. Mm-hmm. And I think we're more likely to be accepting of a movement where you have people like that in it that aren't necessarily like Rothbardians, but they like what Dave Smith says. They just like what Dave Smith says, and they like what he makes them feel.
Well, hopefully what you find is that because he's saying it with confidence, because he's saying that's funny, because he's saying it with charisma, because he's doing it in a room that maybe doesn't like him that much, that they then go on and be like, what does he mean by that?
Right.
And then they go research into the Fed. That idea, that's how the Ron Paul movement happened, right? You're sitting around and you see him say the thing that he's not supposed to say to Rudy Giuliani's face, or he says it in South Carolina to a bunch of Southern conservatives, hey, we should treat other people the way we want to be treated. and he gets booed for it. And a lot of people went, what the hell, what am I watching right now? At least that was my experience and so many other people's
Well,
experience.
and that was actually a thing because this clip cut off at the foreign policy stuff, but he went on to talk about their beliefs in monetary policy and the Fed.
Right.
And the next day, Dave Smith was saying that he was inundated with all these tweets from conservatives that are like, man, I really liked what you had to say, but I have to research this Federal Reserve thing. I didn't even know what that was. He was like, we got to remember, that's where the average person is. They don't know what the Federal Reserve is, right? Not everybody's like monetary economic wonks like we are on this podcast. Right?
And our listeners obviously know what the Federal Reserve is. So, yeah.
Otherwise, get the fuck out of here.
Well, it also goes to, so like you were saying that there's a wave that exists right now, and Donald Trump right now is a captain of a major ship on that wave, and he's inviting us on board to help the direction of steering within that wave right now. And just the overall game theory, it's worthwhile. This is our chance, right? It's worthwhile considering, like, do we want to be part in being able to determine where the ship goes? We're not going to have the full say in it, but we can definitely nudge it into a certain direction, right? That seems to be what is being offered on the table right now. And actually, that's what this next clip is him offering this. So,
first time in U.S. history that a presidential candidate of a rival party will address the convention of a party that is presumably gathering to nominate its own candidate. Now I think you should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So it wasn't the speech. It wasn't ad-lib.
You're right.
You heard those words. Nominate me or vote. Vote for me.
Vote for me.
Because the libertarians want to vote for me, and most of them will. And it's very important. Because we have to get rid of the worst president in history. And together we will. And without it, there's a risk that we could have 4 more years. We won't have a country left. So what is the purpose of the Libertarian Party getting 3%? What is the reason to take a chance of having this horrible president destroy our country, which he will do in far less than 4 years? It's not going to take 4 years. That is why I'm committing to you tonight that I will put a libertarian in my cabinet and also libertarians in senior posts. Pretty good. That's pretty big. Or you can keep going the way you have for the last long decades and get your 3% and meet again and get another 3%. No, you want to make yourself winners. It's time to be winners. You have a lot of common sense. It's time to be winners. So I'm asking for the liberation. Well, think of it. I'm asking for the Libertarian Party's endorsement, or at least lots of your votes, lots and lots of Libertarian votes, based on my 4-year, very outstanding presidential record.
I think that was a really key line. Without it, there's a risk that we could have 4 more years of, and no country left. I think that demonstrates that really, truly, and I don't know that this is even a question anymore, that the Trump administration is concerned about the margin of victory, especially with RFK in the race, who's going to take a lot of the disaffected Democrats, disaffected Republicans who are unhappy with COVID policy, and libertarians, potentially.
Yeah, Not to mention all the dead people who vote for Joe Biden.
They're safely within the Biden camp, right?
There was a point in time where RFK was looking to be a very Ross Perot-like run. I feel like he's dwindled a little bit since then. I don't know what the current polling is, but that is going to be a concern for both camps right now. Yeah. I think he's probably pulling mostly from people who would traditionally vote Democrat right now.
I agree. I think the Kennedy name is drawing a lot of that equity.
Yeah,
and just
exactly.
the lack of confidence in Biden as like a figure.
Exactly.
Right.
Correct.
I mean, you got someone who can't talk.
Yeah, because like if you're culturally on the right, like
or walk,
Trump's just the guy if you want to hit that dissident voice right now. So there's less dissident right wing votes that are going towards RFK, I would say.
True.
But that's at least my kind of analysis in the moment.
Yeah, about the 3% line, because Trump, like, obviously he mocks the party about like, or you could keep going and just get the 3% you normally do. But the subtext there is that like he actually needs that 3%. Like the conservatives are spinning it and saying, oh, like he mocked you to your face, but like because of RFK, like the margins are so slim. And I think that kind of really goes to like why I think this was so valuable. I don't actually think I'm not convinced that having Trump the man there was so important, and I'm not even buying into any of the promises that he's making. I think the incentives absolutely change as soon as he becomes president. He might say that a libertarian is going to be in the cabinet or whatever, but once he's in office, the incentives change. He could just change his mind. What I'm concerned about, because of political realities, because I'm accepting that I'm of the belief that the federal government is kind of lost, and that we need to start looking at the states. We need to start looking locally. So what I'm concerned about now, and what I a few years back started to realize, is that I'm not worried about electioneering. I'm not worried about, for instance, like in Montana here with the Montana Libertarian Party, we always get these, we get called out because we're going to steal votes from Tim Sheehy or whatever. But like, I'm at the point where what will Tim Sheehy gain us in the Senate? What will Donald Trump gain us in the federal government? Because the reality is Donald Trump got in office in 2016 promising a lot of the things he promised tonight. Like he promised to pardon Assange, but instead his administration and the CIA ended up convincing him to go after Julian Assange and plot to assassinate him. So I think once he gets in office, he can't actually be in control. If Sheehy were to be elected, it wouldn't really change. We had the majority in the House. Look what that got us. So what I'm concerned about now is actually telling people the truth, so we can change people in this cultural and spiritual and ideological war that's going on. I think that's more important than repeating this phrase that, oh, this is the most important election of our lifetime. I'm just not convinced. Like, I think we need to start adapting our strategy to reality.
It's less so about the facts of whether or not the union ends if Joe Biden has another 4 years. It's more about how people feel, right? And they have a feeling that there's like a pulling apart happening. I mean, between Ukraine and Israel, war with Russia, financially, the inflation and all those problems, that people feel like things are falling apart, and so that's why they are looking for anywhere else to go.
And that's exactly why I think appealing to Donald Trump is the right strategy, because the ethos that Donald Trump represents, whether he actually believes the things that his base believes, like whether he actually believes we need to get rid of the intel agencies or whatever,
right?
Like, his base is more susceptible to that. So we need to be reaching them. We need, this was amazing for that goal of convincing them.
There was an important part with the Vivek part of it, where they ask about staffing, specifically about his unwise choices, such as, in the classic one is Mustache Man.
John
Bolton.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with Michael Bolton.
Or Hitler.
It was really everyone in Pompeo. Like, Pompeo's the one who went after Assange.
There was a little elf dude in the DOJ.
Oh, there's so many.
Got fired. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, there's so many.
Jeff Sessions.
Or not firing Fauci or whatever. Just like his staffing decisions, and that whole case of, can he actually change, this metric of what he says is his best qualities, that he can pick the right people. And the question is whether or not, after he wins, if he's going to be magnanimous and bring people into his administration to support him and his agenda or not, and how that's going to look. And I don't know that the incentives change if what he's really trying to do is protect and insulate his own presidency and vision, right? I mean, we now know that his own generals lied about Syria. We all know that the existing intelligence communities, and does he actually want to build the FBI building? Maybe, maybe not. We don't actually know that, right? Because if I was running for president as Republican, or if I was advising them, I would say, you can't say you're going to destroy the FBI and shatter it to a million pieces and throw it into the wind. The last guy who said that, it didn't go in well for him. Right. So, you know what I mean? And I'm not necessarily suggesting assassination, but I am saying that this is a problem, right? People are looking for stability. So you want to give stability messages, because the biggest problem that you have running against an incumbent is the feeling that things are pulling apart. So if you're saying, I'm going to pull things together, and I'm going to make sure we persist as a country, you're going to be able to capture that middle America tuned out, not really interested in what's going on in politics.
And this is why the booing was actually kind of disappointing to me, because it's like the boos don't really communicate much. Yeah. So there was a point where Donald Trump talks about inflation, because that was on the list of our priorities. Right. And I hope, and I kind of wish that we had an explainer, this is our position. I don't know if they did that, but he goes out there and he brags about having the best economy ever, and how
because he
lowered interest rates. And it's then he gets booed, but then you have all of these conservatives watching him, and it's they're booing that he had a good economy. They don't get it.
Right.
So, and Dave, I think it was Dave Smith who was explaining this, that he opened up with, in his speech, talking about how he fired Comey from the FBI, and then we booed, and the Chase types might boo him because they actually think Donald Trump is the worst dictator ever, and the CIA should have gone after him or whatever. There might be some narrative like that. But we booed, and the conservatives are like, wait, so you don't want us to fire Comey? Like, was that the bad move? But the answer is no, you fired Comey and then replaced him with Wray.
Right.
Like, that's the issue.
Right.
So like, it is difficult because we're booing him. It's like, it's hard. It wasn't translated properly.
Right. Well, what you hope is that you got people like Vivek around Trump who are actually interpreting this and actually bringing, and other people too, that hopefully are going to be a voice in the future administration or whatever happens after Trump, and to take those positions, right? Because you got to play the long game here. And I think you're right. Culturally, you play the long game. Kyle and I a little bit have been stipulating about kind of how the America First movement is an empty container that has to be filled by things. And once Donald Trump is through his arc,
the post-Trump era is what matters.
Yeah. What does that new Venn diagram look like? And how do we make sure that that next thing that comes along can be captained as much as possible by people who are interested in the issues that we care about?
Yeah.
And that's what, to me, the overall, the probably the most positive game theory, and I'm open to changing my mind on this, but the most positive game theory seems to be for our kind of culture of libertarians to cozy up with Vivek and Trump supporters to a certain degree, start to tone down the grievances a little bit, but just like loud public booing is probably not helpful, but reasonable disagreements is helpful. And especially if people like Angela are actually going to start communicating with like the Trump people behind the scenes to a degree about like cabinet positions and stuff like that, those conversations start to move much more of a private grievances, because that's how business relationships work. You don't want to start like, and he should be a war and he should be charged for war crimes and stuff like that. It's like, I don't think that's helpful in this moment, especially when we're looking at the long-term future of this thing, especially when we're looking towards like 2000 or to 2028 and stuff like that, especially with the rise of stardom of people like Vivek. Dave Smith, his stardom is rising exponentially, it seems like right now. Who knows where that kind of takes off? Like our faction is going to be in a very good position to be able to take the reins of the ship into some degree, at least some percentage of it.
Liam might be running for Montana House at that point.
Yeah, when Liam runs for Congress, we can use his star power.
That's right. The only thing I would add to that, Kyle, is that I think that a lot of the boos, they weren't just a general libertarian disagreement necessarily with what Trump was saying. A lot of the general negative energy in that room was, again, this contingent of the party that was there to try to make Angela and the Mises Caucus look bad on national media, right? And there were concerns. We actually happened to sit down at the same table for lunch with the Sergeant at Arms for the convention, who was talking about all the concerns that they had about all the things that were being murmured inside conversations that people might do to disrupt the Trump event and other events. So there were concerns that this group of haters were going to try to do things to disrupt it. And frankly, I was concerned too. I was like, man, this could be really bad. I mean, it could look really bad. There could actually be some sort of event that occurs.
But I think Trump and the Trump
people
relieved.
I was relieved that
they understand what's happening in this moment.
Additionally to that, risk averseness is the thing you can't do when you're losing, right? The last thing you can be is risk averse. And that's what I actually like about this is, even if it had all backfired, at least they did something. Right. At least they did something to put, and at least there was no naked dancing guy. I mean, like, at least there's...
I'm surprised. I thought that was going to happen.
So there was...
I was looking forward to it.
There was the individual dragged out, and I don't know how clear that was from the media perspective, but from the media riser, I could see the whole thing transpire in front of me. I didn't see it start. But an individual was trying to hold up a flag or a banner. A libertarian individual there as a delegate had the banner ripped out of his hands by a Trump supporter. They got into some sort of tussle, or somebody fell, and then security was called in to take the libertarian out. I don't know. I don't know if there was aggression or whatnot between either of them, but it certainly made for a spectacle. And you could see, I mean, it was amazing how quickly every media camera, every cell phone in the room immediately honed in on that, ignored the speech, and immediately watched the commotion going on. Because what more do you want as a media personality or as a Trump supporter is to say, oh, I went to this thing and the libertarians were unruly and they were disrespectful and we got in a fight and it was crazy and these are just nuts people and you shouldn't associate with them.
That's what Laura Loomer would say, right?
But there's exactly also a thing too, when I was just looking for clips and I was trying to find where to find the best coverage of the debate and all that stuff, or of Trump's speech, a lot of the titling on the videos, like YouTube live videos, was Trump getting booed at MAGA rally.
Yes, right.
And within the first 5 minutes, because I had the same exact feeling, like I said, so I'm like by Secret Service just to the right of him, so I can see the entire crowd, and someone just to the left of me shouts, "You should have been shot," as soon as he gets on stage. So it's like, I also had the concern that
he said, Trump should have taken a bullet or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. But so afterward, I go up to Dave and Scott, and they both had the same reaction. I was just like, how did that go? Like, what do you think about that? And they're like, they have the same reaction that I now have, which is like, anyone who went into their app, their news app the next day, it was New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, and they just kept going. They're like, they just kept listing publications, and you can scroll through there and you find like really bad stuff, like that guy saying that you should have been shot or whatever. But you also have the paragraph that I described earlier, where it says, "We want Trump chants were drowned out by and the Fed chants." And it's like, most people don't know what that means, and I guarantee you they went to look it up. We had Trump supporters near us asking who Ross Ulbricht was. And it's like, many people don't know who he is.
Yeah, I'll jump to that clip here, because one of the biggest things I think was a symbolic victory for the Ross Ulbricht stuff. For people that don't know who Ross Ulbricht was, he was he's still alive,
still with us.
He's just in jail now. He was the person who made the Silk Road, which was kind of like a free market, black market website for free trade, essentially.
Yeah, you could buy and sell anything you want, including illegal drugs, using cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and this is like early days. This is like 2013. He went by the moniker of Dread Pirate Roberts on it, and he got a double life sentence and has been in jail for about 11 years now. And one of the peace offerings and the offerings of friendship here was Donald Trump saying on day one he would pardon Ross Ulbricht. And you also have a sign, because people that watched the event
brought home a little souvenir.
There was a ton of these up here. Like I had people asking me, what is this free Ross thing? Like I had a lot of people asking me that.
And you should see the Google Trends analysis.
Yeah.
Just goes absolutely nuclear.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, here is him making that promise.
And if you vote for me on day one, I will commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht to a sentence of time served.
See, you have libertarians there booing, and it's like because what they're really booing at is the fact that they just don't believe him, right? Because he made the promise in 2016 that he'd pardon Julian Assange and didn't. So that's why they're booing. But it's just like, dude, what are you doing? Like, we're trying to convince these people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's just evidence of, again, the like purely autistic lack of political savvy that is present inside of the party, or malice. And I could see both. I could see people just wanting to make this whole event look bad too.
A lot of it is Trump derangement syndrome too.
That as well.
Like
that as well.
if this was Vivek saying it, who's basically in the same category, it would have been an eruption of cheers, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it was an eruption of cheers, but it wouldn't have been quite the same thing, because people just have that animosity towards Trump, and a lot of it's irrational, right?
But I mean, to be clear though, like while there were maybe a few boos, and you could hear them in that clip, the energy in the room at that time was absolutely euphoric. I mean, it was amazing and just absolutely electric.
I didn't expect it, honestly. I did not expect that.
So we haven't really talked about Ross Ulbricht. I gave you the background right here, but like, why is it such a cause du jour for libertarians, I guess is the question.
I think that there's three major symbols when it comes to pardoning. It's Ross Ulbricht, it's Julian Assange, and it's Edward Snowden. And I think that's Edward Snowden because of Fourth Amendment spying, very critical to the libertarian ethos, right? Ross Ulbricht, I think a lot of it comes down to free trade, cryptocurrency. There's a large contingency in the crypto space. Like, all of my people were freaking out about this as well.
I think it's also for Ross is that it's the disproportionate and ridiculousness of the sentence. It's
Absolutely.
like 3 life sentences
Absolutely.
for running
You
a
have
website.
Well, it's like,
Just
look at
making an
Ghislaine
example of him.
Maxwell.
Exactly.
Gets how many years?
20 years.
Ghislaine Maxwell gets 20 years, and a kid who made a website gets 2 life sentences plus like 40 years. Like,
it's clear.
It's gratuitous.
It's clear they're just making an example of him too. Like the black market has taken over since, and this still happens. And Ross was actually grounded in the non-aggression principle. Like, the charter of Silk Road was very much like, you just can't violate rights.
Yeah.
And so it really is a shame. I mean, they are making an example out of him. And Trump didn't say that he's going to pardon him because
commute his sentence.
Yeah, they're going to commute the sentence, because I think there is kind of sentiment among conservatives that he still like deserves some punishment. And I did talk to Angela, and it does seem that it's unlikely to get a Snowden pardon, but they are open to an Assange pardon. Mm-hmm. And on Timcast, which was released after the convention, apparently Trump said that he's going to look into it. And
yeah, I actually have that clip that you tweeted out.
And I understand the skepticism of these things simply because it's just ridiculous to have a president who's got to look into it at this point. But it is a delusion of the way power works to say, oh, what I need is, when you don't have the power to demand someone who has the power to take on your views, unless what you're doing is holding their feet to the fire and saying, we were open to voting and working with you. Does that make sense? So,
Well, there's also, remember with all these things, I think that there's this delusion that exists of just imagining that if a guy comes in and he has all these promises, he can actually do all those promises. And like, remember, Trump had his generals lying to him about troop movements in Afghanistan, right?
Syria.
He had his deep state actively trying, spying on him and trying to frame him for treason. Right. There's all the Russia hoaxes. You always got to remember that these things also exist. And Trump, in his own way, he has to also be kind of careful with his words and what he promises in this moment. Like him. Julian Assange is remember, you had the CIA director like plotting to assassinate this guy. Yeah. You got to be very careful here. He can't just be super outright about things. He has to be vague about things too.
And Tucker Carlson, as part of the Secretary of State was out loud saying, "Can't we just kill this guy?" I mean, this is crazy, right?
Was that Hillary?
No. This is during Trump.
Yeah.
Who was it? No. Was it CIA director?
No, CIA. It was Pompeo.
Yeah, Pompeo. Right.
Wasn't it Hillary though that said, "Can't we just drone strike him?"
Yes. I think so. During the Obama administration.
There's a lot of people that have just said things, and you start to blend them.
Well, when you have this kind of power, that's the sort of questions you start to ask, and that's where you get a question.
Let's play that him with, because this was right before he went on stage. I believe this was recorded like an hour before his speech.
Yeah, and you can hear Ross chants in the background.
Additionally, one more thing. No small thing that Tim Pool showed up at the LP convention and covered this and interviewed Trump there. That's a big deal.
And he's been the most gracious to libertarian guests. He has Dave Smith, Clint Russell, like
as a
Reed Coverdale, like a friend of mine on the show. I follow Cassandra McDonald. Like I could probably go on there if I DM'd and wanted to. Like he is extremely gracious,
and he's supportive of the Mises Caucus faction of the Libertarians, and he's very disgusted by the woke ideology that is swept through. Like that's kind of his shtick, right? He's
an anti-leftist more than anything. That's his philosophy.
But also that being said, he has been very gracious to the Mises Caucus peoples, like having because Michael Heiss isn't like a famous person. Mm-hmm. He's a political actor in this stuff, and he's been on there multiple times explaining this is what's going on in the Libertarian Party, right?
Yeah, Bob Murphy was on there during the middle of the pandemic talking about secession, and and like. He has said that he would have endorsed and maybe even voted Libertarian if Dave Smith was the candidate. So, like, I think he
tweeted that.
Yeah, he was somewhat invested in the party at one point.
Yeah, and he wants to see this direction for the party, and not where it has been.
Not the other one.
But here's him talking with Trump on the Julian Assange thing.
One more big one. Will you pardon Julian Assange?
Well, I'm going to talk about that today, and we're going to give it very serious consideration. And we're going to have a couple of other things to say in the speech that I think you're going to love.
I've heard some rumors.
And you've gotten so much out of me, I should leave a little bit for the speech, don't you think?
Mr. President, it is an honor and a privilege.
My honor.
Yeah, so he's looking into it.
So my read on that is, I just think what a lot of people suspect, and others have said that like Donald Trump isn't like an intellectual, like he's not looking into these things. And my read from that is he does not know who Julian Assange is, because I did not hear anything like that in the speech. I didn't hear Julian Assange brought up. So I think he might have conflated Ulbricht with Assange, knowing that he was about to make...
I think Ulbricht was the surprise that he said he wanted to keep for the speech.
Yeah, it could be, but he said, we're going to talk about it tonight, and he didn't. So
And I think you said something, speaking to the Ross issue, Liam, earlier when we were talking, you brought up a really good point that when you see the trends line of searches for Free Ross or who is Ross Ulbricht go nuclear, that is the public becoming educated and aware of an issue that they previously had no idea of. Without that awareness, that public awareness, someone like Trump doesn't have the public cover in order to really step in that direction. There's no support for it, so he's not going to do it. So just him being on this stage, just him being on this interview, saying these things, bringing these things to the air for his audience to see, gives them higher probabilities of actually coming to fruition. Yeah. And I think that's super important.
Well, there's certain other symbolic victories, because he also had the field of cryptocurrency. We want to bring that into the United States, and that's a big thing alongside the Ross stuff, where there's a certain segment of the population where the crypto vote is actually becoming important. That's another marginal vote, and it overlaps with the libertarian Venn diagram.
True.
So much to the point where everybody in my industry was freaking out yesterday, I believe, or 2 days ago, because Trump's first crypto transaction occurred where he actually made a trade, and everybody's like, oh my God, this is like a historic moment for us. And all these people are starting to sweep over there too, because my industry has gotten very infested with woke ideology, but there becomes this thing where it's like, well, this guy basically wants to throw us in jail, and this guy wants us to be able to like actually live in the country. So like, oh, what are we going to do here?
Yeah.
Right?
And there's also additional dollars, right? So if you run a super PAC or something like that, and you raise money amongst the crypto bros and then spend on the election, that is actual power that Trump wants to cultivate to his side. So you actually are playing power politics at that point. You're actually getting an opportunity to create an incentive for him for his legacy, and whoever comes next, he needs to follow through on what he's saying. Otherwise, they're not going to be trusted.
True.
He also announced that he's going to ban central bank digital currencies.
Yeah. And that's a thank you Vivek moment. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it followed "End the Fed" chants. I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but we were in our Discord chats, we were deliberately chanting "End the Fed" because that was a legitimate policy. And Mike Lee was on the stage right before Trump, and he announced that he's going to be introducing the "End the Fed" bill in the Senate. So that's why we were trying to chant "End the Fed" specifically, because it's a legitimate bill that is going on right now.
No small thing that Mike Lee's at the Libertarian Party convention too. I mean, like, he's a very well-known leader in the Senate for the conservatives, and not always libertarian on everything, but definitely like one of the heroes of the Senate alongside Rand Paul.
You know who else showed up actually unannounced that I was aware of was Nicole Shanahan, RFK's running mate. She was walking around the periphery of the floor of the convention during some of the business on Sunday and taking interviews and stuff. I think there was maybe a chance she was going to address the body. Is that right?
She posted the speech that she was going to read.
Oh, which didn't happen because things just ran long and there was no time.
Yeah, I think we limited the speech for presidential candidates. I'm not entirely sure, or maybe did he get voted out before that? I don't remember what, but I think she was there to give a speech, maybe about her being vice president. Maybe she was going to run if RFK won the nomination. Maybe it was her plan to actually get up on stage and try to run.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
So moving on from Trump, I guess we get into the presidential nomination and because this is something that also got massive coverage just outside of our like libertarian circles because of who wound up winning.
Yes.
Do you guys want to walk us through kind of how that day went and how we ended up where we are now?
Yeah. And I don't want to retread too much over the events that occurred around Michael Rectenwald and the night of the Trump speech. But
who was Michael?
So Michael Rectenwald was the sort of the presidential nominee for the Mises Caucus, right?
And he was the
candidate that was certainly the favorite, that was endorsed by Dave Smith, backed by Mises Caucus, etc. An intellectual, a professor, very scholarly guy who had, very deep knowledge of libertarian philosophy.
And he was also, it was also like, he was kind of symbolic for the Mises Caucus's strategy too, because one of the goals of Michael Heiss and just the Mises Caucus in general was trying to get to a point where people in the Mises Institute looked at the Libertarian Party as a positive thing. So having someone who was a Mises Institute scholar, who actually had read Rothbard, who had written papers for the Mises Institute, has written multiple books about like the Google Archipelago.
Yeah, I actually read that book several years ago. Didn't even realize they were the same guy until fairly recently.
So I guess that's kind of what he represented. That was the like why it was symbolically important, is you had like Jeff Deist endorsing him. And it was like the first time Jeff Dice had said anything that was favorable toward the Libertarian Party. You had Walter Block before he went on to get his endorsement renounced by Michael Rectenwald because of his position on Gaza. Walter Block endorsed Rectenwald. So it was just like these major Mises Institute figures who are now like, okay, well, we can get behind this Libertarian Party. So I think that's really what he represented. Ultimately, the Mises Caucus base, because of the void that Dave Smith had left, they just couldn't unify behind him. And there were people split between Rectenwald and Josh. Josh is kind of more of a bold, charismatic speaker, whereas Rectenwald had like the knowledge, and you need both, right? And that's what Dave Smith represents. He's kind of like the synthesis of the two. Like he's a comedian. He knows how to work a crowd.
He's already a star.
He's already a star, and he's read all of the Mises Institute stuff.
And to be clear, for those that might not be aware, Dave Smith had been saying for a year or more leading up to this point that he was going to run, had some family events that prevented him from being able to do so, and that took a lot of the wind out of the Mises Caucus sails. But fortunately, they were able to find a candidate in Rectenwald that people could rally behind, maybe not quite as strongly as Dave Smith, but he was a good candidate who intellectually checked all the boxes and was able to kind of give them someone that they could back going into the convention.
Yeah, and I would say that people were not, like, from the beginning, people were not unified around Rectenwald because Josh Smith, he announced that he was running kind of before the Mises Caucus really had a strategy. So it was like, oh, if Dave's not going to do it, I'm going to run. So then you had, and he was a Mises Caucus guy, so he pulled Mises Caucus people to him. And then, like, some people in the Mises Caucus saw that as a slight. Josh had some history running for other offices. He had served as vice chair, and he had resigned because of animosity between him and Angela. So there was already some history, and it was just an unfortunate event that, like, the Mises Caucus just couldn't unify around someone.
Yeah.
This happens in politics all the time.
Yeah,
this is not unique to that.
No. Well, what was unique was what transpired after the Trump speech, which, again, I don't really want to go into deeply. I think Clint Russell did a great job of detailing the large part of the events, but Michael Rectenwald, thinking he was done for the evening, consumed a cannabis gummy of just extraordinary magnitude.
He told me it was 100 milligrams.
Yeah. Which is what the joke was leading into this podcast.
That's
you
right.
said that in case people didn't realize. We didn't actually take gummies.
We did not.
No.
But if we had, we would be drooling out
a liar.
both sides of our mouth right now.
That's a lot.
I mean, that's a lot. That's so much. If you're not, like, familiar with cannabis, even if you are, right, and you're into edibles, like, that is just an extraordinary dose. And there's a lot of lessons learned here. But it was incredible to me, actually, that Michael Rectenwald was even able to get on stage and do what he did in those circumstances. Because
it's kind of impressive, actually, in hindsight. And when I was there, I was like, man, this is really strange. Like, this doesn't seem like him.
So he addressed the room before Trump spoke, which had some interesting moments that Clint detailed pretty well.
Trump supporters are in the room because, like, people came to see Trump. Right?
True. And did some weird stuff, and people were like, okay.
Talked about our Operation Warp Speed and how we're never going to vote for Trump in front of a bunch of Trump supporters.
Right.
And in Clint Russell's podcast last night, he came out and said, apparently, Dave, Clint, and Rec were talking about what they shouldn't cover, and that came up.
Yeah, so, that's exactly what. Let's not cover that.
Yeah,
like, and that was and then he went out and said
thing.
it.
Yeah,
but where things really went off the rails, you guys, was after Trump spoke. And this was an audible, I believe. So there was a straw poll that was conducted during business on Saturday to try to figure out who the body thought the presumed presidential nominee was going to be, and that person was going to deliver some remarks after Trump to sort of respond to Trump's address. Well, the straw poll results got messed up, and so they're like, well, we'll just take the top 3 vote getters. Well, that happened to be Rec, Mike Termott, and Chase Oliver.
Mike Termott, who we interviewed on this podcast. You guys did. I wasn't there.
That's correct. Yes. And so those 3 end up doing a press conference, effectively, a 3-headed press conference, kind of juggling questions from the press who were invited down front to sort of respond to, Trump's comments. So I went down front. with my new friends from Being Libertarian, which we got along really great up there on the Media Risers. Great to run into those guys. And things just proceeded to get stranger and stranger, and Rec's answers just started getting more and more strained.
What was so strange about him? Like, what?
Well, he wouldn't really answer a question. It seemed like he was just not comprehending the question to the degree that he should be, and he sort of resorted to stump speech slogans. He repeated himself quite often. Pauses were awkwardly long. I mean, to the point where at one point someone did shout from the audience, "How high are you?"
And he goes, "Not high enough," which was actually funny.
It was really funny.
But the thing, he was doing stump speech stuff, and it was almost like he was addressing the audience as if he was still speaking, and not the question. He wasn't addressing the press.
It wasn't a press conference response. It was a stump speech response, and it was completely out of place and incredibly awkward. And I did not want to be where I was down in the press pit. I was like, "Get me out of here!"
And I cannot imagine how he felt the next day. I cannot imagine. And I actually had the opportunity to talk to him afterward, and he was in great spirits. Not great spirits about losing, obviously, but after the convention, I went up to him. I'm like, "How you doing?" And yeah, he was leaving the hotel. He drove up to me, and he's like, "I'm still in it. I'm in it for the long game, and I'm just getting started." So
that's good.
I mean, he is in good spirits now, but after the fact, it did seem like he was like, "Wow."
It was rough, and the reason I bring it up, just to kind of conclude this piece, is that while there was maybe shaky support for Rec going into Sunday's voting for president, this was a pivotal moment for people who were supportive of him, or maybe peripherally supportive because they were Mises Caucus people. They just kind of got behind that candidate. It was, for myself included, would have been really hard for me to go down and put his name on a ballot having watched that happen, because no one knew why yet. Yeah. No one knew why he freaked out. And what he ended up doing was saying, "Look, this is just a Trump bash fest, and I'm not interested in that. This is a waste of my time. So I'm going to go. It's late. I'm tired. I'm going to go." And so he walked off the stage, and on his way, he did, some funny maneuvers. It was just absolute insanity. Wow, and everyone was just like, "What are we even watching here?" Yeah. And it was really tough to watch.
So it gives me kind of flashbacks to Gary Johnson. How it just seemed like he always had to smoke before an interview, and he's just like, "Come on, man!"
It's one thing, and so that is the key piece here, is that Rec had been using cannabis to kind of get his mind right. He's a writer. He's got a different kind of brain. He's not an orator, so that was helping him kind of focus. Obviously, just really overdid it. Yeah.
And the opportunity really left Termott and Chase, who ended up becoming the ticket, to play off of each other as he left. And I do think it hurt him. I got some messages from people who were like, "I was supporting Rec before, and now I'm not." It is still impressive that despite that, he came close. He won I think he won the first 5 rounds.
He did. So he started out in the lead. When we got to Sunday voting, he started out in the lead with maybe just under 30% of the vote. Yeah. And every round he went up in percentage and led the first 5 rounds. It was only until it came down to him, Termott, and Chase Oliver, when really the negotiating had, the rubber had to meet the road in terms of figuring out, okay, whose delegates are going to go where once this third place person drops out. And so Termott was in third place. He was in the position of being eliminated at that time. So it was going to be Chase Oliver and Michael Rectenwald going into the final round, as well as, important note, none of the above, which is sort of your default, I don't choose anyone.
Well, and wasn't there some sort of an agreement, because Clint Russell looked like he was going to be favored for VP, right? But then there was an agreement in order to let this all progress, that what if we give it to Mike Termott, and then he ends up bringing all his people over to the Mises Caucus side.
Yeah. So what happened was, as Clint described it, Chase Oliver's camp offered Termott the VP preference. Obviously, he still had to be voted on by the body, but they offered to throw their support behind him for VP if he threw his delegates towards Chase Oliver for president. And then it came to the Mises Caucus side, and they were deliberating, can we make him the same offer? They asked Clint, who was the VP preference for Mises Caucus, if he was willing to do that, and he said yes, he would be willing to do that. And so they made the offer. And it seems like there were some overtures between the Termott camp and the Mises Caucus that they were friendlier, like in the lead up to this.
Well,
like
and the way
they were kind of close.
The way that Termott sold himself to us on our interview was that he was like, I'm friendly with everyone. Like that's how he kind of positioned himself.
Right.
And we haven't really diagnosed him as a particular side.
Having
here.
an allegiance to a caucus or another.
I met him as a Mises Caucus member. That's how he sold him to myself. I later found out that he's like a part of all the caucuses, and that's how he tried to sell himself.
Nobody can be mad at him if he just joins every caucus.
Right. It's true. So ultimately, he did end up in a very shocking move to, I think, a lot of the Mises Caucus members throwing his support to Chase Oliver, which pushed Chase not quite to the amount of votes he needed in order to win. It's 50% plus one to clinch the nomination. He got 49.5%, somewhere in there, to Rex 44.5% roughly, and Noda, none of the above, had 5. And so that's when things really got interesting. Liam, do you want to run down that next piece?
And it is important, like here, like just to call back to the beginning when we were talking about the dilatory stuff. Like by this time, I think 2 people from Montana had left, and Clint said I think a total of 200 people had left, because this was like late Sunday.
Midnight,
when it was like we were going into Monday morning. People had flights, people had to work the next day, so a significant portion of the body had left, and so like he said, the ballot goes on to move to just be Chase and none of the above. That ends up being the final ballot, and at this point we are considering what our strategy is. I go up to Heiss, I go up to Clint, and I'm like, how can we sell Noda on people? Like, we need someone to run for president, because essentially what would happen if Noda was elected is it would either go to the state, or I think it would go to the states regardless, but none of the previous candidates who ran for president could run. So it would have to be someone new. And the only person who was running who was prepared was Clint Russell. So I'm like, Heiss, we got to call him now. Like, get him down here, tell him he's running for president. And he agreed. So I went around and basically was like, how can we inform everyone to vote for Noda for this strategy? And we messaged the Discord channel. I was trying to make a point of information or point of personal privilege to like effectively ask a question, like, say a certain Clint Russell just announced that he might run for president if Noda wins. What would be the procedure to get him? Like, I was trying to announce it to the entire body, and ultimately Chase wins with, I think, 60%.
60%. Yeah, Noda took around 30%.
And a lot of people voted for Chase. I heard this from a lot of people. They voted for him because if we had Noda on the ballot and then didn't ultimately decide on a candidate, like if we didn't fill that spot, many states would immediately lose ballot access. So there were many Mises Caucus members who weren't informed about the Clint Russell strategy that were just like, all right, I'm voting.
I'm tired. I'm going to bed.
Yeah. And I'm holding my nose. I'm voting for Chase. Right. We need to do this for ballot access.
So part of this, so I guess the next question is, who is Chase and why was it so contentious? Like, why is there such a big split, and why did this have to go to however many rounds of voting that it happened? Like, who is Chase?
So,
who is now the presidential candidate?
So Chase ran for governor in Georgia, and this was, or was it the Senate? I think it was Senate, because it was the Warnock race, right?
That's right.
And it got kicked into the runoff. So many people say that he was a spoiler in that election, even though it went to a runoff. So, I mean, he really wasn't a spoiler, but like people like to say that.
Yeah.
So that's where he really got famous. And so he represents these Prague types. He came up to us and when we were voting for Noda or him, and basically said, I will be a unifying campaign. Please vote for me. And, you know, I haven't been in the party as long as like people like Heiss, other people in the Mises Caucus. And their response was like, dude, you called us racist. Like you called Ron Paul racist. And then he gets defensive and says that he never has. He only called one person racist, referring to Lou Rockwell. But as Tom Woods said in his newsletter a couple of days ago, like, we all know what he's saying when he says Lou Rockwell is racist. It's Lou Rockwell is, you know, at the Mises Institute. He runs the Mises Institute. Like, he's on the board. We know that he's saying, yeah, your faction Jeff Deist included, Tom Woods included, Ron Paul included, Dave Smith included, you're racist. And so, I mean, he represents really like this pragmatist ethos we've been talking about this entire time. When he was elected, so I think this was actually sparked by Termott, because Termott makes an announcement condemning bigotry, and instantly right-wing Twitter blows up.
Yep.
And the narrative became, and I immediately tweeted this too, that it was extremely ironic that the people like Chase, all these prag types, opposed inviting Trump, because what I would hear is like, oh, we're giving a platform to him, as if Donald Trump needs a platform, right? and they were like, somehow we're giving him an advantage. Somehow we're going to give him the nomination. He's going to become president because of us, right? But now the narrative on right-wing Twitter is we have this woke libertarian. We have this woke libertarian who is essentially a gift to Donald Trump. This is exactly what Donald Trump wants.
I had big Trump supporters message me. It's like, it seems like everything happened. It was just incredibly beneficial to Trump.
Yes, absolutely. So before we had leverage because Clint Russell and Dave Smith and Rectenwald, the Mises Caucus guys, like their strategy, like because they're actually competing for the base, and because they acknowledge political realities that they're not going to win in November, and they adapt their strategy accordingly. Because of all that, like Trump's very concerned about the 3% if we're in there. But like, because Chase is convinced that he's going to win in November, and because he's adopting all of these regime talking points, like I'm sure we're going to get into some of the tweets and stuff. The narrative now is like, well, now there's no leverage at all. Like the 3% just goes to Trump, and there's no incentive for Donald Trump to actually negotiate with Chase.
Well, and a big part of the Mises Caucus takeover, in my estimation, just having kind of watched it from the outside for many years, is it's kind of like who the candidates are culturally signaling to. Like, I didn't know who Chase Oliver was literally until the night that happened, and I just took one glance at his Twitter profile, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, rainbow flag in the bio. We know where all the signaling is going to. And it was the same thing. Like, a lot of the emergence of the Mises Caucus came out of disappointment with the Joe Jorgensen campaign. And there was a very famous tweet that is, it's not enough to be non-racist, that you must actively be anti-racist. And just like, that tweet in isolation, like, okay, yeah, don't be racist, right? Like, that's all it means in isolation. But you have to take it into context of the larger apparatus and all the narrative wars that are going on. That is just like a very clear signal to the regime supporters, typically, like people in that camp, the neoliberals, the Washington elite, like that is who that is signaling, like, and is like, look, I have all this virtue, right?
It's also the interpretation of the moment, right? It was during the Summer of Love. It was at the moment where everyone's saying, if you don't support Black Lives Matter, you're a racist, right? Yeah. So it's in that context where
it's
people
like
are
putting
saying,
a black square on your Instagram profile, right?
It's a virtue signal. I mean, and additionally, that the context of the totalitarian impulse of like the kind of progressive neoliberal, I guess, to say like, oh, we all have to be together in how we think of this moment, and this moment is about fighting racism. And a lot of people are like, no, it's about the people burning down our cities. It's about the people who want to abolish the police altogether, and like that. And a lot of this happened to actually do with Donald Trump, and perhaps encouraged by the Open Society Foundation. A lot of people thinking about that, and then what she's talking about is trying to signal the same message that Adidas is giving us, or that the Biden administration is giving, rather than what is going on with all this burning down of private property and that sort of thing, and criticizing, the actual apparatus of the regime.
And then that's the main complaint that I think a lot of our types have about this guy, is there's just a lot of that type of signaling that goes on, and he's been doing it for years.
And the thing is like, he could, like, just being as like, just giving him credit where he deserves it. Like, he is really good on Ukraine and Gaza. Like, he could pull over a lot of Biden supporters for that, because RFK shot himself in the foot October 7th, and like, he's been terrible on Israel since. So like, but the thing is he's only going to pull those people over. So it's just like, it helps Trump. And Clint made this point that like, it's not clear that he'd be able to explain the issues either. Like the Giuliani moment, the reason why it convinced all of us is because he actually got up there and he explained blowback. Like
Ron Paul debating Giuliani for people that aren't aware.
And the thing is like he didn't just get up there and say war bad. Like he just said, yeah, like when we engage in these conflicts, there's blowback and it's not good for us.
Yeah, and then he actually used the CIA's own terminology because blowback is a CIA term for explaining that phenomenon, right? So it's like it's not just like it's not just kind of like a weird pandery to the anti-war. It's like, this is what happens. And it's like, it's charismatic, but it's also gives information, like it's educational and charismatic.
And you could feel, and this is much more intuitive, but you could feel that he really cared about it, that he actually really understood the topic. Yeah, authenticity too, the way he talks about the topic. And I haven't seen Chase Oliver to say whether or not he could speak with that kind of authenticity on the topic, or if it's really a passion project for him, or is he a libertarian for other purposes, or does his principles come from other places?
Well, and Clint made the point, apparently he has seen him say that the war in Ukraine was unprovoked. So he's adopting similar talking points.
I wish you weren't a liar.
But he's still opposed to funding the war, but he's using the regime talking points about it. And it's just like,
that just demonstrates you don't know anything about
history.
Well, and that is when you guys were gone, Dave and I did a podcast where we went very lengthy and we were talking about a lot of this infighting, especially with like Cato and Reason types. Usually my problem with those types is they tend to fall for whatever the current thing is in the moment, and then they kind of become better on it afterwards. So like they'll use all the regime talking points and they kind of just like fall in line with it when it matters. And
so like his messaging over COVID was like I'm opposed to vaccine mandates and mask mandates, but he's like masked up. He got all the vaccines and now he's like opposed to the booster. So like he was falling for the regime talking points at the time.
Well, and a lot of the tweets, because I gave my thoughts on that in the Discord, and I made a point where there's a tweet that a lot of conservatives are outraged on, but then there's a lot of libertarians that are like, this is the correct libertarian position. Why are all the libertarians mad about it? Because he had this thing where like business should be able to like freely associate with who they want to and all this stuff, but the problem with that tweet was like I technically agreed with it if it was in isolation, the tweet itself, but the tweet was also sent out a month before the Canadian trucker protests, during the time when people were going to their governors to see if they could go outside or not. And it's like the tweet is not actually comporting with the current reality of the situation. This isn't the conversation that we're having in the moment. And you trying to like make that part of the conversation in the moment is very non-useful. And it's just signaling that I am part of this regime's talking points. I'm just like a little bit of a lighter version of it. That's what it's signaling to everybody else, right?
Yep.
So like I totally understand like the theoretical need, right, to discuss what is the libertarian vision on how to respond to a pandemic. The trick is in the middle of the pandemic, when all these civil liberties things are happening, when all these like crisis of everyone panicking to try to sow all this fear, right? In the moment when you have all these violations of liberties, to really come down with like a milquetoast, but technically the libertarians would accomplish the same thing by voluntary means. It just doesn't do the thing that we want out of a libertarian messenger in this moment, because what you need is a red pill moment. You need a Giuliani moment in that moment. You need that person who's going to get up and say, I get all these things, but we shouldn't think of viruses like an invading army and violate everyone's civil liberties in this mental model. The model's wrong. The method is wrong. This is all wrong. We should be going about it in an alternative way, and really hammering that, no, the regime is not just in an error or inefficient, it's evil, right? And that moral clarity is what's missing in that moment, right? And that's just where it's not hitting, and that's the cultural message, right? That cultural thing that says there's something more going on here, and we need a deeper, like a more red-pilled way of articulating it.
It's because, like, I think that these people, they like miss the media moment we're in. Like they're just not, I don't know if it's because conservative media is at the front of like the new media moment we're in. Like they're the ones that are really like taking over podcasts and taking advantage of it. But like they're not watching Dave Smith go on because they have like Mises Caucus derangement syndrome and Trump derangement syndrome. And they
Rogan derangement.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're not watching Dave Smith convince people on these platforms, and they don't realize that the most reachable people are the people listening to those platforms. They're just like, they're completely out of touch. And another example of this is he tweeted out after Donald Trump got banned on Twitter that he was happy that he was gone.
I know a lot of libertarians that thought that. had a lot of
I
debates
just can't
with them.
understand that.
Had a lot of
why
debates
would
with them.
I'd like, okay, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I actually find these folks just bad messengers, right? Or having the right position
Yes.
or a bad message. But that's like the wrong message and the bad and the wrong opinion, right?
And an obvious one.
It's the same thing. I remember talking
Twitter's
with
a
a lot.
private company. And,
okay, so sure, but like it's bad for the country if you can't hear from the president directly. Like that's an obvious thing to me.
This is actually something I want to give Clint Russell a shout out. When he originally started his podcast, Liberty Lockdown, I remember tuning into just a random episode, first time I had ever really listened to him. And one of my biggest critiques of libertarians back in the 2020, 2021 era was I was trying to tell a lot of libertarians about things like DEI policy and ESG policy, and they thought I was like wacko cuckoo. And then I tuned into Clint Russell and I heard it, and he was like, he went on talking about it for like 2 hours at length. And I was like, oh, he clearly understands this. I was like, okay, maybe there's some hope among the libertarians right now, because one of the reasons why why libertarians, in my opinion, were so bad on the social media industrial complex, like the censorship industrial complex, as we've now come to kind of call it, thanks to Schellenberger's work, is they didn't understand the ESG dilemma at the time. And it was like wacko to them that it was even a thing. Because they're just like, no, social, like private social credit scores, those are fine. Like that would be the type of responses I would get from libertarians. And I was like, oh, thank God you had people like Clint Russell at the time that actually understood this.
It also wasn't compatible with their own principles at the time, because there was a dialogue at that time about cancel culture and why it's bad and why the value of free speech isn't just in preventing the government from speaking, but also in the value of everyone being able to talk without losing your job for having an opinion that you shouldn't be, that you know, is controversial at the time. That like tolerance for ideas was the talking points of the very same people saying, we should, at least in this case, we should not have Donald Trump.
This was the response I got from a lot of libertarians during that time period. Private cancel culture is good. Yes, that is a libertarian principle.
And so this is
from the ones that were always preaching tolerance.
Yes. This is what Scott Horton told me. It's like, okay, you could make an argument from like pure libertarianism that like private companies should be able to discriminate and kick people off their platforms or whatever. But
which I actually agree in isolation.
I do.
But we're not living in isolation.
And the thing is, but we live in the United States where freedom of speech is just not a cultural ideal. And we should be able to criticize private companies that do actually remove people from their platform.
That's the neoliberal point of view. The neoliberal point of view is that there's an important value that we developed out of the English tradition to say that your ideas aren't you, and it's okay to have bad ideas, right? And you put those ideas out, and you should be able to say that in the public sphere. And we might go like, I disagree with you, but I'm not going to burn you at a cross for, you know, in the public square for it. Does that make sense? Like that idea of religious and ideological tolerance is a very important part of the development here. And that's the thing that drives me crazy. And like, okay, I get it. We're selective about where we enforce it. And this is obviously the worst example. I believe in it until it's Donald Trump's Twitter account, and then it's whatever. And of course now we know that the intelligence community was heavily influenced on Twitter, and there was signals at the time. Some people picked up, not everyone did. They largely we didn't have the material evidence at the time. But that moment of trying, and this is always where your intuition I think is right, Kyle. That moment of the intuition of like what is going on and how broken things are, they just made the wrong call at the wrong time, and that's just a signal that they don't have the right instincts.
Well, and there's also an added thing, because like in an extremely ideal libertarian society where everything's actually just dictated by free markets, which we don't live in that world right now. Like the freedom of association with businesses, like I'm completely on board with that. But the problem is right now we have massive state apparatuses doing massive propaganda like campaigns over the COVID regime. Mm-hmm. So when you're sitting here being like, you know, I think that like businesses being able to select on the vaccinated stuff, you know, I think that's good. Like, I think that's good. Like that was kind of like a lot of the libertarians had that. It was like, yeah, but they're operating off of the information from a massive propaganda campaign coming down from the largest government in world history. Yeah, right? So there's a little bit of like, yeah, in isolation, the freedom of association, like that argument always holds true and is sound. But we also got to remember the forest that is here. Like you're looking at a tree when we're having a conversation about forests. Right?
Yes, and this demonstrates like how good the Mises Institute people were, like in comparison to the Cato and the regime types. Mm-hmm. Because like in the same way that like the Mises people have been right about all the economic crises, they've been able to predict them. We were also like ahead of this too. We were ahead of COVID.
Yeah.
We were also ahead of the social media though. It was Tom Woods who would make the argument before we even had the Twitter files. He would make the argument, well, like if you were to go into a private business or a private restaurant and they cooked your steak well done and you ordered it medium rare, you should be able to criticize it. You had Dave Smith pointing out that Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk were being brought into Congress and grilled by senators and congressmen.
Yep.
What do you call that? That is state intervention. These aren't private companies. There is state intervention.
Partly, we also call them public companies. I remember because of like
exactly
by threatening them.
And Michael Rectenwald, this shows you just like how big of a contrast the messaging is and the understanding of things. Michael Rectenwald, his book, Google Archipelago, was also about this way before the Twitter files came out. That these are, I forget, he calls them governmentalities.
Yeah.
That's what they are. They're not private companies. They have been coerced by the CIA to follow through with regime talking points and censor people. So,
that's
including the president of the United States.
And that's one of the reasons why I will always align with the Mises Caucus types, with the Dave Smiths and the Clint Russells and all these types, is because they tend to be ahead of the game on actually understanding propaganda and how it affects us. Because one of the biggest problem is like, this is the problem I have with so many of the more like institutionalized libertarians, as I typically will call them, is you're libertarian. You should have a view about the state and how they operate. You shouldn't fall for it every single time when they try to like propagandize. Like, you should be better than this. I have higher expectations of you.
Yeah, I talked to Dave earlier today, and it's like the reality is what makes Chase different from like him is that like Chase doesn't hate the regime. Like,
they're just a bunch of knuckleheads that think it's inefficient. Like, that's the way that they view it.
That's exactly it. If you have talking points that are being promoted by corporate media, like, they are also a part of the regime in the sense that they are like advocating for the state. They are advocating for all of the state's propaganda and the different, like Chase was like, well, the regime is right about the vaccine and the regime is right about masks, and then others like Joshua Equal
until they're wrong.
Equal. Exactly.
Right.
And others like Joshua Equal has been promoting the Ukraine war this entire time. But look at it, like, we have the United States government like admitting like they're not doing well. And you have Lindsey Graham going over there and advocating for a lower draft age. And it's like, we were ahead of all of these issues. We were ahead of the 2008 crisis. We're ahead of the next crisis when it happens. We've been saying that it's going to happen. We were ahead of COVID. We were ahead of Ukraine. We were ahead of Israel. So it's just like at a certain point, you just have to realize one side is based in reality and the other isn't.
So what does the Libertarian Party do? What do libertarians maybe more broadly do now that these guys are representing the party as the presidential ticket in a manner that doesn't represent probably anywhere close to the majority of libertarians' views?
So I guess I'll just say, so there are a lot of people who are really pessimistic about what's going on. And I still have PTSD. Like, this hurts to talk about, like seeing this image of the two, I don't know if
bold
pulled
message.
it up, but it says hate won't make America great. So like, that's the big message that you're coming out with as soon as you become presidential.
Just remember, like, we're talking about the signaling. These types tend to signal to, in our opinions, the wrong people. And that is exactly what this is doing.
It's just blue pill. It's just really, it's just lame. It's just this.
But
betas.
But the thing is like,
betas. Thank you.
There it is. The thing is, like, I do want to focus on the good that came out of this. I know I talked to Dave. Dave came out with a very long post where he took blame for the Mises Caucus failure, and he told me, I mean, there's no way to hide behind this. Like the Mises Caucus project in terms of the presidential candidate did fail. But I just want to say, like, and just to push back on the sentiment as an entirety in a friendly way, Angela McCardle promised to bring Ron Paul to the Libertarian Party convention. She did, and then she was reelected. And not only just reelected with like some of the board, we took 80% of the board. The Mises Caucus took 80% of the board. We have Chase Oliver for 5 months, maybe. I mean, if he does something disastrous, I read through the bylaws, he could be removed from the ballot. I doubt that happens. But
the biggest disaster is if he just comes up with lame messages, just like cancer is bad.
So there's a case for removing him right there. But I don't know if there's appetite for it. But like at the very least, we knew that RFK Jr. was going to bring like historically low numbers at LP. If you look at Ross Perot that election year, I forget who we were running at the time, but it was really low numbers. So the same thing is going to happen. And, you know, there's almost like a silver lining here, because if we would have had Dave Smith up there and we got these low numbers, they would have made fun of us. They would have mocked us. It would have looked bad.
And it wouldn't have been Dave's fault.
Exactly.
And a perverse incentive to care about the Libertarian vote going forward.
The one thing that would have been good about it, though, is that despite that, Dave would have been saying the entire time, we're not going to win the presidential election. My goal is to impact the culture, because we need to convince libertarians. That's his, in my interview with him, he said, the reality is just people haven't heard these ideas. People don't know what the Federal Reserve is. So we have to do that before we can even think about being elected.
And here's the realistic thing. Even though Dave's not the presidential nomination, he's going to have all the media attention where he might as well be.
Yeah.
Like, and he doesn't have to have the baggage of being the presidential nominee, because he's still going to go on all the podcasts. He's going to be getting more hits than Chase Oliver. He's going to be, you know, like, because he is Mr. Libertarian now. He's got so much kind of mimetic energy behind him. And if he was going against Trump, who has massive amounts of mimetic energy, I actually think that might have been a net negative, actually, to go against him in this moment.
I think Dave's the only one that could actually handle Trump. But I don't think
like in a debate situation.
Right. But I don't think
they're not going to allow him on the debate
I don't
stage.
think that it would have bode well for like the people we're trying to meet. I mean, like the thing is he is like the Libertarian Party. He is Mr. Libertarian, like you said. So like what I told Clint is, because he was wondering whether he should run on the same ticket with Chase, because he was still in the bucket to be the VP candidate.
I would have been worried about what happened to Spike Cohen on the Joe Jorgensen, where he kind of just got lumped in with like the wokeness. Like I didn't really know Spike Cohen until he was VP under Joe Jorgensen, and my impression of him throughout that entire time was that he was kind of like this woke. Well. He was part of the Prags, and then afterwards, when he had like kind of a podcast with Dave Smith, actually, I was like, oh. He's trying to be diplomatic with his presidential candidate, and he just kind of had to get roped into this.
I don't think Clint would have been, though.
Yeah.
So the reason I told him to run is we would have a Mazessian dude as the VP who would overshadow the presidential candidate. You would be going on all the big platforms. Dave would have been able to get you on Joe Rogan. Yeah. You know, so that's the case. It's just like, and why I'm still optimistic is like Dave's going to be debating Chris Cuomo in a few days. In a couple days.
Tomorrow, I think, or Friday.
31st, I think. Yeah. So like, I mean, at a certain point, like he's going to reach a ceiling. Like, where do you go after that? Like, you have to debate Ben Shapiro probably, but like he is going to be.
Ben only debates. He only debates 18-year-olds. Dave's too old for him.
But the thing is like he represents libertarianism in the sphere we want to be reached, and like. Dave has already come out and said that he will not endorse Chase, and same with Clint. So I think I'm just optimistic because I do believe in this project. I believe that it is important to have a party that, like I said, is able to talk about Mazessian ideas 100% of the time. There is value in the linguistic battle, in the linguistic war. Like, we should not cede the word libertarian over to them. They took the word liberal, like the left took the word liberal, but currently right now we're actually having this battle over the word libertarian. And while it's happening, we should try to wrest control over the third largest party from these people, even if we weren't able to do it from the presidential ticket. Like, I believe in the long-term vision of having an institution that can get on the same platform as like candidates like Vivek, who have guardrails in their messaging, and you're just principled. And the entire time, it was David Nolan's vision for the party when he founded it that he would be principled 100% of the time and be like the socialist party to the Democrats, be that version for the Republicans.
Yeah, like what the Green Party is,
exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah,
and it's
not us being socialists. be crystal clear on that.
But yeah, you play the same incentive role, you play the same ideological role, and that's the important part of this is the party as vehicle for ideas, and Dave Smith doesn't stop doing that. And none of the other folks who are trying to, spread these ideas, spread the mental model about how society can organize themselves differently through the mainstream. That continues, right? Even if the LP candidate for president isn't very good.
Exactly.
So it's not, people really black-pilled hard on this. A lot of people resigned. I mean, Heiss resigned, right?
I wouldn't say that was necessarily because of this. Like Heiss had been talking to me for a while about it, just because he had
a lot of people are prescribing it as that. You think that's fake news?
Well, in the same way that, so Jonathan Casey, who was the classical liberal caucus guy, he
also resigned.
He resigned, and it's like, well, they won. So you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, but he had the same reasons. He had been in the party and been running the caucus for a while, and I have had conversation. I'm friends with Heiss. I've talked to him a lot, and the reality is he had been, like, he just had a kid. He had been in the party for a long time, and he just needs to start focusing on his family and get a real job. I mean, he's been volunteering and helping with the party and the Mises Caucus for years. So I am not black-pilled. What Heiss used to tell me all the time is, and this was after like Dave dropped out, it was like, the presidential election is not an end in itself. Right. It was always a means toward the decentralized revolution strategy.
These are just opportunities to advance the messaging to a broader audience.
Exactly.
That's all they all are. It's just like Ron Paul running for president wasn't really about winning the presidency. It was always about a messaging.
And the decentralized revolution strategy was emphasizing issue coalitions like the Defend the Guard Act, which Chase Oliver's like great on. Like he has been going around the country and helping states with the Defend the Guard, and if he wants to come to Montana, I'll welcome it. But that was always the goal. The presidential election was to use the gigaphone, having Dave Smith be on that platform and say, I'm not going to win in November, so instead join your local Libertarian Party and partner with them on Defend the Guard Act, marijuana legalization if you're in a left district. And it's using the Scott Horton strategy, which is you attack the right from the right on libertarian principles, and you attack the left from the left on libertarian principles. And you just do that, and you're just aware of culture. You're aware of like the district you're in and the voters that you need to appeal to, and adjust based off of what's successful or what can be successful.
Well, and that's the big
district.
thing. Dave Smith actually understands culture.
Yes.
And so many libertarians don't. And actually, one of my white pills on this is the rising stardom of Clint Russell. I think Clint Russell is going to be a future star and like Dave Smith levels down
That's
the road.
exactly what I said after that moment we played.
I felt that throughout the whole thing. And he's somebody that has only emerged onto the scene after the lockdowns happened, right? Like, I think that he is going to be somebody that is a big contender, because right now one of the biggest problems is the only contender that has existed has been Dave Smith. He's the only one that has like been very good on the broad outward facing public messaging, right?
Yeah, and I think in the future, like the Mises Caucus would.
Him and us. We're just getting started. Like that's the crazy thing to actually watch.
Sorry, Liam.
It is true. Like you showed up at the convention this weekend, and you handed out a lot of business cards and met a lot of people, interviewed Dave Smith. Like I do think you guys are doing the right thing, because you do understand culture, and I think like it's in the fruit of this podcast. Like you guys are about to hit 1,000 followers, and I don't see that stopping.
Well, and that's just on YouTube, because we got like all this stuff we have over 500,000 views on one TikTok.
Yeah, crushing TikTok.
Yeah, we're big in Ireland. We'll start the Mises Caucus in Ireland. Okay. But there is a thing there is like, I've been listening to Dave Smith since he was our podcast size. Like, and there was several years where I listened to every single episode of Dave Smith, right? Like, so it is very impressive to watch him at this point of how big he's been. Like, he is a guy that exists outside of just libertarian circles right now. He has a wide audience that spreads just beyond like our people.
Yeah, it's so funny, like trying to talk to people who aren't tapped into like this space we're in and like the liberty movement at large, like people who don't follow news actively, like like trying to describe to them this, it makes me seem so crazy because I'm like, this podcaster who went on Joe Rogan, I'm trying to and like
a dozen times.
Yeah, we talk to each other. It's huge. Like this is the biggest thing that's ever happened in my life.
He was on Tucker last week.
Yeah, he was our presidential candidate. He was going to make big waves. Like, but
okay, Liam. Okay, cool.
But the reality is like because we're in unprecedented times, and because like we really don't know what's going to happen with new media. Like Joe Rogan is the largest platform in the world. Like trounces like all podcasts. And I think at one point during the pandemic, they said it was like 12 million views per episode. So like, and that was around the time Dave went on there and talked about Yemen, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And that might be like the sole time where 12 million people have been able to like learn about that event. Like
even heard about it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Everything Angela's done and kind of everybody around her for getting this event, like there's a reason why we're spending a lengthy bonus episode here talking about it, is because it actually was significant.
Yeah.
And like that can't be said about any other libertarian convention ever before.
No.
It's never been significant.
We've never received that much news. And just to like go back to your question, it's just like Angela McCardle secured the party despite all of the hate. Mm-hmm. And she looked so impressive on the stage. Like she, compared to Reno with our chair, we had to replace the chair, I think like twice. Like we had multiple interim chairs during that convention because they could not handle how chaotic it was. And she was so impressive up there. And the thing is, we secured the party. And like I said, we have 80% of the board for 2 years. Chase Oliver will be in the limelight for 5 months. Mm-hmm. So if it's disastrous, if he receives less than 2%, we can like do damage control.
Well, I'm curious about this. And to kind of put a bow on it, because this has been a great conversation, and we've got a good overview of this thing. What do libertarians do for the next 5 months? If you don't feel like Chase Oliver represents your views as a libertarian, what are you doing, Liam? And what are you guys going to do? What's the direction here?
This might be a better question for you guys because I still don't know. I think a lot of people are in that kind of space right now with Heiss stepping down and with the loss. I think people are wondering what's next. I would say I'm in it for the long game. I do believe in this party. I think it is very important, like I said, to have an institution that shares our name. It is very important to wrest control over a party from people who abuse the name libertarian, because the language battle matters, and this is how Marxists win. They abuse language. So I think having an institution, the third largest party in the country, that actually represents libertarian values, I think that's very important, also because I believe in truth. And so I believe in the long-term vision of it, and I want to sell people on that. Mm. And like if you see the value in having Mises Institute, like for people like me who have been fans of like Jeff Deist for years, to see him endorse Rectenwald, that's ultimately why I was like convinced of the campaign, is Jeff Deist came out and said that he was supporting Rectenwald.
I really appreciate Jeff Deist.
Yes. So
just as a human,
if you can imagine a party where it was possible, if we had buy-in from all of the Mises Institute people, if we had a party where like those people accepted the mission, and we got to a point where people like Jeff Deist could have been on the stage with Vivek this weekend, the Mises Institute people, any of them could have been the nominee, right? Like that's my vision for it. Is Misesian people in this populist moment where we have Javier Milei in Argentina winning on a third party ticket. Like the libertarians had never won in Argentina, and he did it. And when we have UFC fighters shouting out Mises, like I want the party to get to a point where we can be there when our country gets so bad that people are desperate for libertarians.
And you can also just like steer the other guys. Like there are culturally adjacent people that exist that we can align with. We don't have to agree with them on everything, but we can work together on the important aspects, right? Like there's a massive shift happening in one side of the political dialogue right now, and we can move them in a particular direction towards us. We can move the Overton window, right?
And it's really hard to measure, but like I would say it's like part of the reason why Donald Trump has adopted this messaging about like ridding the deep state, getting rid of the deep state, ridding the government of warmongers, all of that. Like he sounds very libertarian. Like as you have said, like Donald Trump represents an ethos that is much larger than the man. Like the man might not believe the things, but like his supporters do. His supporters storm the Capitol, for God's sake. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's just like there is value in what we are doing, and I think convincing those people, like we have been able to do it, is my point. Is like I think it's really hard to measure how big of an impact we've had, but I guarantee you, without Dave Smith, without Clint Russell, without the war rally, without all of those people, the right would not be good on Ukraine. Without Dave Smith going on Joe Rogan's podcast really early in the Ukraine war, when it was very controversial to oppose it, and educating people on the origins of it, and having Joe Rogan go, really? Like that's the history of this? I think that like it had an immeasurable effect on the culture because it was so early. And now we have Tucker Carlson adopting that message. We have Joe Rogan adopting that message. We have Donald Trump adopting that message.
Candace Owens.
So many other. Well, and also there. Just on the linguistic territory of the word libertarian, like I was very disappointed with libertarians at large. Like I have my favorite libertarians where I identify with them, but like the general of what is a libertarian from the 2016 to 2022 timeframe, really, I was very hesitant to use the word because like I'm a guy who studied Rothbard and I've studied I agree with the Mises Caucus ethos, right? But like what became known as libertarianism in the normies' eyes, I was like, that's not me. Like I'm not part of that cultural ethos, right? And
it is funny. Like I was talking to Dave about this as well. Like I identify more with like the Jimmy Dores on the left.
Yeah,
who,
exactly.
Acknowledge like the ridiculously, the regime talking points than I do with Chase. It's just true.
Yeah. I would much rather side with a Jimmy Dore, even though especially on like economic stuff, we're completely but that's the thing is like we don't have to agree on Medicaid for all, but like there's a certain cultural ethos of how we actually view the regime and the state and all these things that we libertarians love to complain about. Like they're with us on that.
It's the reason why I identify with conservatives in Montana more than most people at libertarian conventions.
So when you think about kind of long term and short term, so I've been at this for almost 14 years now, right? And when I think about the total amount of time in which I've dedicated my professional and career and my spare time to education and making an effort, to me, this has always been a very long battle that you're not going to win quickly. I always look to, and I mentioned this on the Discord, as your white pill, and just to remind, William Wilberforce. Do you guys know who that is? Yeah. So he's the guy that abolished slavery in the British Empire at the height of the British Empire, in the middle of when they're at their strongest, and he did so after 40 years of advocacy, and he died the next day.
Wow.
Right. So like the guy. He's a legend in many ways. There's probably false things about the legends. You can call that out.
There's always mythologies and half-truths, right?
But the mythology really matters, right? In this sense, if you would have asked at any given point, is the British Empire going to abolish slavery next year? It would always have been a no right up until the end. And it wasn't just that he had a seat in the House of Lords. He was in a fortunate position, who had the right connections at the right times, but he had an enormous amount of people who believed in what he was doing, and he built a movement over 40 years to make the difference. And so to me, what I've always seen it as is no matter what happens, I've been there during the Ron Paul setbacks when we got outflanked in the Montana delegate selection back in 2012, right? When that happened, I was really discouraged. And I remember going to the men's restroom with a couple of the other Ron Paul delegates, and the guy just being like, no, we just go back next year. And that guy's still advocating to this day. He doesn't live in Montana anymore, but he still advocates for the Campaign for Liberty and for everything that Ron Paul was running for. That guy's not giving up. I'm not giving up. And the whole idea that that this is limited to a single election or anything like that. No, these are the ideas of life These are the fundamental ideas about how you can live a life of peace and how we as together can cooperate and live a life of prosperity, right? Those ideas are immortal and they're not going anywhere. And I would much rather, for the benefit of my children, benefit of the future, be on the right side of that, saying the right things and using my voice to say the right things.
Yeah. Gene Epstein, whom I've had on my show, he makes the exact same point about slavery in the United States, just that like, I forget the exact dates that he says, but like 5 years before, like if you would have said like, we're going to not have slavery in the United States, it's going to be illegal in the United States, like you just wouldn't believe it.
Right.
And I completely agree. And to be completely honest, like I want the party to get to a point, like even in Montana, like where it's perceived as something that like people like yourselves want to invest in, like not necessarily in like, oh, like we need to get actively involved now, but just like to see the value in having something that like has power over the linguistic territory, because it's just like, especially here in Montana, like I'm a first year law student, 24 years old, and I have like outsized influence on it. All it would take is 10 people joining it and we become like a force that is like radical.
That's got to be kind of crazy for you, actually.
Like I run the Twitter account. like I'm the
don't tell certain people. So a lot of people that bash on you personally, they don't realize that they're actually liking your tweets on the Libertarian Party account.
That's all right.
But that's the whole thing, is like you're not wrong. And like the way I see it has always been Republicans and Libertarians, that these are ideas that are more important than any party. Parties are tools for the acquisition and maintenance of power, but they can also be messaging vehicles, right? So at each step of the way, to me, I let all flowers bloom strategy, right? One of the questions I wrote down is, the LP is still a valuable strategy after this. Yeah. And you're saying, yeah, it can still be. And that's just a function of work.
100%.
The people who won this worked at it, right? The Liberal caucus, they stayed up later, right? They've recruited new people to try to take back what they felt like they lost, right? So the LP, if they give up, that's the only way to be sure that the Mises caucus loses, is if they all go home.
Right.
Yep. Right.
And that's the strategy, I think, right? Is it's a war of attrition. They played it at the end of the conference when all the Mises caucus people had to leave to go back to their lives. It's about just continuing the work. And I remember, on Sunday night, after it was all said and done and the ticket was set, I walked out into the convention hall and there was Maj Touré standing where he was the entire weekend, practically in front of the Mises Caucus booth. And we just got to chatting, and I asked him like, what's next? And he's freaking hoarse because he's talked his ass off to every person who would listen all weekend. And shout out to that guy. He is such a freaking warrior for this movement. That what he had to say was exactly this: just back to the grind, back to the battle, back to talking to people, back to recruiting, back to making sure that we embrace the decentralized revolution, the principles that back that, and just back to understanding that, like, hey, we can control what we can control within our own local communities, within our states. What happens at the national level, there's only so much control that we have over it, and to walk away from it now would be the worst tragedy of all.
Well, and here's another thing, like a lot of people are going to say like the Mises Caucus was a failure, blah, 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 all this stuff. And the strategy of the LP here is, if Trump ends up being the guy that gets elected and libertarians actually get a seat at the table, and he keeps that promise, he gets cabinet positions, senior staffing positions, etc. Ross Ulbricht gets pardoned, all of these things, and maybe even more beyond that. And we have like an influence of it, like our camp. That's a success in my mind. Like it shows that the strategy was correct, and it's better than whatever these other yahoos have been doing for the last several decades.
100%.
Like I said, if all we get out of it is Ross being freed, that's a win and the most power we've ever had. And Ron Paul in his speech at the convention, as he says in every speech he gives, he says people used to come up to him on the campaign and ask how they should get involved in advancing liberty, and he used to say, well, do whatever you want. Do whatever you have fun doing. And so, like, as Austrians, like, we believe in the division of labor, and like we understand the principles of it. So I do not believe that the strategy is exclusively GOP or LP. Mm-hmm. I think the interplay between Vivek and Clint demonstrates the value in having both, because you need them to bounce off of each other, because like it was just so obvious in the moment that like Vivek wants to agree, but he can't. Yeah. He has guardrails on it.
He's smart. Like he's smart on the Machiavellian nature that he has to play.
That's also why he's playing a different game.
And he has to.
Yeah,
in this moment.
That's
he
also why
needs to be that guy right now.
That's also why Mike Lee and Rand Paul aren't the same as people who run for the LP, although they're very well aligned. That's why every libertarian knows Thomas Massey is a libertarian, except for a whole bunch of Republicans who thinks he's just conservative because he has R next to his name. Like there's lots of. And there's always a blurred line there because we agree on property rights and we agree on some fundamental assumptions. So I don't know. I think it's definitely a thing where you need both and to draw them over. And this isn't a competitive thing. It's let all flowers bloom. This strategy works. Yeah. And for the agorists and the communitarian types who are like, we're going to withdraw and we're going to like bucker down, that's okay too. Go do it. Have at it, man. I respect that decision. Like I understand risk averseness to such things about how you're going to use your time. But some people can't sleep at night unless you're advocating for something real for your future. But right. And because we have the opportunity to, we are lucky. We don't live in Russia, right? We can actually change the regime over time by persuasion. And that's what and if you're going to spend your time doing that, what better use?
Yeah.
100%.
You're giving a mouth.
And I would just call on the people who can't compromise, who because I do believe that people have different aptitudes. Like there are certain people who can run in the GOP and they can strategically cater their messaging a certain way without feeling like they're selling their soul. Mm-hmm. But there are others who feel like they need to be telling the truth all of the time. And if you at any point have felt like that and you see the value in the party and having an institution that bears your name, that represents your values, and you see that there's potential, and it was demonstrated this weekend with how much of a success it would have been. It would have been absolutely crazy if we had that event and we had someone like Dave Smith that leaves that convention and goes on to message real libertarianism. Right. If you see the value of that and the value in the decentralized revolution strategy, I recommend joining the party, and I recommend going to the Mises Caucus's website too and reading their mission statement, their decentralized revolution document that was written by Aaron Harris and Michael Heiss about how culture matters and how, sometimes when you talk to a Republican and they're unwilling to vote for the Libertarian, it's because, culture and identity matter. And the reason they're voting red is because their grandfather did. Mm-hmm. And understanding that and then adapting your strategy based off of those realities. So that'd be what I'd say to anyone who's interested.
I think there's one other area in here, and it's just remember the future as well. We're in a very strange political dynamic in the past several years because of this Trump era that we're in. He's just so magnanimous and just has so much mimetic energy around him. He's just a walking meme, right? And remember, the Trump era will end, and the political dynamic is going to be drastically different after that. And it seems like the battle lines are forming on where that's actually going to be, but we're still in that disruptive transitionary period. And it's just remember where, recognize and notice where those battle lines are and who's kind of adjacent to you and who you're able to work with versus who you're not. Because you are going to have enemies and you're going to have allies, and it's not just going to be, your only allies can't just be libertarians.
Well, because think about it, in 2028, we were teed up for probably another Nikki Haley race, DeSantis, Vivek, and Gavin Newsom. And no one has that mimetic energy, like hardly anyone but Vivek, right?
Vivek has a lot of it.
So then you have Dave Smith or whomever, Judge Napolitano. I'm just trying to think of all of these figures that if we could get them to see the value in this, and get them to run, it's just it's so the opportunity is there.
Well, it's imagine if RFK or Dave Smith were running an election that was just, some bland neocon on the right and then some bland neoliberal on the left. If it was Biden versus, I don't know, Nikki Haley. Yeah. Imagine an RFK run as an independent or a Dave Smith run as a libertarian or something like that. In that race. Yeah. That's a completely different story than this year, right?
Yeah. Additionally, and you have imagine for a moment, just stipulating in this alliance, what if in 2028 Vivek gets both the Libertarian and the Republican ticket?
Yeah.
Huge.
If possible, assuming it's possible, right? Throwing that Hail Mary pass. Come on. Like that would be a very different moment on every single level of viability.
And we had people in our party who wanted RFK to be the nominee or Donald Trump. And it's like, I mean, if you're going to do that, like it might as well be someone who's like pretty aligned.
Right.
But I do want to,
because Vivek is so aligned.
And you've set it up, right? I mean, you've set it up. And it's not perfect, but we're going to find people to disagree and all that kind of stuff. But the whole point being like the next thing that's going to happen, right? And the last thing you want is for the standard bearer of the other major the other major power wielder in the United States to be controlled by the neocons again. Like that's the real danger, as much as anything else. Like right now, say what you want about Donald Trump, at least he's not that. He's at least somewhat skeptical of that party. He went after Liz Cheney harder than anybody, and it's the reason why she's not a congresswoman anymore. So,
well, and the real shame in not having like a Rectenwald Clint Russell ticket is that it appears the regime is kind of setting Donald Trump up to move away from that talking point, or at least like point it back toward neocon agendas. Like, for instance, I saw Tom Cotton on Fox News last week, and he's saying Donald Trump is an anti-war candidate. He's a non-interventionist candidate because he believes that it's peace through strength. And he said Donald Trump was the first person to send weapons into Ukraine. Obama even wouldn't do that. Yeah. So he's like kind of bragging.
He's trying to set it up. And that's both a persuasion for Trump, but it's also how he stays elected in his own state, because Donald Trump's more popular than Tom Cotton is in Tom Cotton's state.
But then Donald Trump afterward, he comes out and celebrates the aid package to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan.
He's the one who got it passed.
It really does kind of seem like the regime might be trying to position Trump in a way.
But that's the thing. It does both, right? It both will criticize him through some mechanisms and then try to shape him into with other mechanisms. And we have to do both, right? You have to have someone who comes along and says, Donald Trump has all these problems, man, and look at all these things. And so people are aware of them. But then you also have people saying, but America first means, and adopting his language and moving along to our direction, right? So you have to have the push and the pull to get.
Well, and I'll never forget the moment when Donald Trump bombed that airstrip in Syria, and that was like the first time the regime's like, man, this is the first time Donald Trump has been acting actually presidential. Like remember the framing around things,
or the way that Scott put it in his speech. He gave like a 20-minute speech at the convention preceding the Donald Trump speech, where he talked about all of our real grievances with Trump. And he said the problem with Russiagate and trying to make it seem like Trump was conspiring with Russia was a scheme to get Donald Trump to actually be tough on Russia. Mm-hmm. And he ultimately probably gave Ukraine the aid package as a result of that messaging. So the value is if we can be a party that says, no, like, there's a faction out there that will actually celebrate you when you resist, that is good. Because currently, like, there aren't.
Right.
Yeah, and that's
especially in DC, like in the culture of the swamp, right? It's hard for people who haven't been there to understand what it's like. But it is so insulated and echo. Like, it's not just echo chamber doesn't really state it quite right. It's more like you only have a singular voice and a singular culture, and that monoculture is so pervasive you can't really. It's hard to break outside of it unless you have very specific
every
principles.
group. It affects
it
affects the Democrats, it affects the Republicans, and it affects the Libertarians.
And up and down too. It affects your congressman and your congressman's assistant.
Yeah.
Right. The janitor. Right. Everyone through the entire hierarchy has exactly the same message, which is the generals support it. It's good. Right. Like the thing is the thing that we do, right? I was there in 2013 when Snowden came out, and it was like, this is bad. No one said why. It was just like, this is bad because it's bad, right? That's how low resolution the culture is there. So in order to overcome that, you need electoral incentive that cares about that. And that's what America First represents. It's within the Republican Party and then the Libertarian wing of that's pulling it that direction, a contingency that says, no, you have to resist this blob narrative, and pulls any actor out of that incentive structure. At least that's how I kind of visualize it.
Well, it will certainly be fascinating to see what kind of influence the Libertarians can have on the Trump campaign going forward, and we will certainly be following that as we go.
Absolutely.
But we have been talking for a couple hours here, guys. So
one more point.
One more point from Liam.
We got to finish this out, and then we're going to get into why Ben Shapiro is a Jeffrey Epstein of debate.
Is this the members only show?
No. So I just want to emphasize though that like the Mises Caucus strategy has very much been a local decentralized strategy, and I think because of the fallout There are a lot of people who are saying that the project is a failure because of the Chase thing. But the reality is like 200 delegates left. There were so many factors. Jonathan Casey was advocating for them to be dilatory. Like, we just lost the strategic battle at the convention, but we control the party right now. And the goal has always been decentralized initiatives, because we have always maintained that we're not going to win the election in November. And we're not going to take over. We're not going to win the Senate seat. We're not going to win a House seat. So what can we do in the meantime? If you guys agree with this sentiment, like the decentralized revolution strategy, if you read the mission statement, it's about issue coalitions like Defend the Guard. And I was very active on Defend the Guard last year, and we kind of took over the Capitol with it. We had veterans pouring into that room who couldn't be in uniform, while lobbyists who could be in uniform, the adjutant general who could be in uniform, got up and were afraid because of the numbers and how successful this bill was. And we had a majority of Republicans backing this bill. And this is a libertarian bill. The Libertarian Party, and through my relationship with Lee Deming, the representative who was my civics teacher in high school, we introduced this bill. And this is what we're about. We were able to move Republicans to get them to say things like, the opposition is saying that the federal government, if we pass this bill, will pull funds, and to have the Republicans say, I don't care. That's what they say every time. And to move the needle on that, and to have a groundswell where we're actually impacting the culture and moving issue coalitions in that direction. I had a conversation with Thomas Massey on the Redheaded Libertarians Twitter space and got him to endorse the bill. I asked him about it, and he said, I've heard all about it, and I hear these adjutant generals come in and they threaten the legislators and say they're going to pull funding, but they'll never name names. And he said, if I can help in any way, I will. Maybe I'll bring them up in front of a committee and grill them if they can name names.
Yeah.
And then Matt Gaetz. I met Matt Gaetz at a Matt Rosendale meeting, and I told him about the bill, got his number, sent him information on it, and he was on a Twitter space with Angela recently talking about this convention. So if we can move the needle on these cultural issues, and in next year I won't be able to be at the Capitol every day like I was last year, but if we can have a movement that like agrees with this strategy and shows up next year, I think we could really we could be the first state to pass this bill, especially with the attention we're getting. Tucker Carlson also invited Dan McKnight on his show to talk about the bill. So I just think that if you see the value in the Libertarian Party, help out with initiatives like that. We desperately need it.
Well, and also you just named all of our like most natural coalition partners right there.
Yep.
Too. Like, and that's a way to think about it. Like, they're not necessarily libertarian, they don't have the name, but a big Venn diagram of where they're willing to work with us and where we can be friendly with.
And in other states, like Michael Heiss lives in Pennsylvania, and he talked to, I can't remember if it was a Republican or a Democrat, but he talked to one of his representatives, or maybe it was like a committee person, and she was a veteran, or was aware of veteran issues, and like was worried about PTSD. And he said, because it's a more left-leaning district, he said, why don't we have psilocybin legalization? So it's just like the strategy is very much like having a pulse on the culture of where you're at and where you're living. And it's like here, that might not be that successful. I guess it would be successful since we have people like Ken Bogner who have advocated for that. But like the hot button issue that is movable is the Defend the Guard Act. And for those who don't know, I guess I didn't explain it. The Defend the Guard Act is a bill that would prohibit the governor from sending National Guard troops overseas to countries like Syria, Iraq, all the other countries we've been engaged in, so long as Congress has not declared war officially. So it's holding Congress to, what they're required to do.
Their supposed role.
Yes. So, and the argument that we hear is never a constitutional argument. It is always, well, they might pull funds. We heard that lobbyists took out legislators on helicopters and said, hey, you like these helicopters? Well, you might not have them if the Defend the Guard Act passes.
I prefer using helicopters for other methods.
but like we never have a name. I guarantee you Tester would not allow that. If we pass the Defend the Guard Act and then Biden or some, bureaucrat said, all right, we're pulling all funds from Montana, Tester or whoever is in our congressional delegation would not allow that, because that would, it's almost like if they're that crazy that they're going to do that they're actually going to risk the readiness of our National Guard because of a political move, because we're trying to hold them accountable. Let them do it, because we will win that optics war.
True.
So it's just like getting to a point where we can influence legislators, know that they have support, and that it's like grassroots support. Rand Paul has endorsed it. Tulsi Gabbard has endorsed it. Vivek Ramaswamy has endorsed it. Like I said, Thomas Massey has endorsed it. And if the Libertarian Party could get Donald Trump to endorse it, that would be extremely significant.
I would put a rocket fuel on getting it through legislators.
Yeah.
The question is whether the governor sign it. That's the real
and
question.
he actively opposed it.
Yeah. I'm not
I know that Tanner Smith has endorsed it. He voted for it. But the thing is Gianforte's messaging regarding the border is, I want the National Guard at the border.
Yeah.
The Biden administration is trying to take away state sovereignty and abusing our National Guard soldiers. They should be at the border and in our country instead of overseas. So it's like, why did you oppose the bill? Why did you veto the bill? And
it's very natural for the America Firsters.
Yeah.
Like in the current trend that they've moved along when it comes to these types of issues, it's very natural for them to get on board.
I researched this a lot this last year because I was in a constitutional law class and I had to make the argument for it in a moot court thing. And the argument for the Defend the Guard Act is that the National Guard gets its authority from the militia clause in the Constitution. It is a constitutionally distinct and its purpose is distinct from the rest of the military. Its purpose is actually listed in the Constitution and is to repel invasions, defend against insurrections, and enforce all other constitutional laws. Being that no one has declared war and that these engagements are unconstitutional, being that they have nothing to do with insurrections, and being that they have nothing to do with invasions, the National Guard doesn't belong over there. And so then people will bring up the Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Perpich. And U.S. v. Perpich was a case where Perpich, the governor, withheld troops from going overseas to training. And the Supreme Court said, because of readiness and because of two statutes, Title 10 and Title 32, states are required to uphold readiness and follow through with training missions. So that is a constitutional law. Therefore, a state cannot withhold their troops from it. But they never ruled on wars. They never ruled on engagements. This is area that has not been addressed by the courts. And that has been our argument is like, if you're really worried about it, let it be fought out through the courts, because there's also some serious questions that have arisen due to the border crisis with Governor Abbott about where the authority over the National Guard comes from, because they do have dual authority. They're under certain circumstances, they answer to the governor. Under certain circumstances, they answer to the president. Where is that? It's not really clear. And really the court hasn't addressed foreign policy. They've liked to defer to the executive branch, but it'd be interesting to actually have this like interplay between federalism and the executive branch and see where they end up.
Especially how the current Supreme Court orientates towards Chevron defense and other sorts of executive privilege defenses. There's a good chance they might go in the direction of, unless it's a declared war constitutionally, and this makes a lot of sense from my understanding of the Constitution, they're the governors until there's a declared war. That makes the most sense given the text.
Yeah, and it's just good policy too. It's just like
it's also like, sensible policy.
Yeah, it's just good policy. I mean, like during Hurricane Katrina, I think it was Louisiana or Texas's National Guard were overseas fighting wars, and they had to bring other states' National Guard in. We had a similar thing during fires. They were over in Syria, and actually like they engaged ISIS in a prison raid, and they were in Syria, and many people did not know that. And they wouldn't have been over there if the National Guard was law or if Congress was doing its job. And the reality is, like when I talked to Matt Gaetz about this bill, Matt Gaetz is like, well, why don't I introduce legislation like this at the national level? And I'm like, well, how well has your war powers resolutions for Syria and Yemen done? How well has Rand Paul's efforts to repeal the 2001 AOMF been? They symbolically got rid of the 2002 AOMF, but when you listen to Mark Milley, he says, well, all of our current engagements are dependent on 2001.
Yeah.
So if you get rid of 2002, it's not really going to impact us.
Right.
So it's like Matt Gaetz, like, if you're not going to do your job, if Congress isn't going to do your job, the state should, and the state should hold them accountable. And if they're going to threaten to pull funds, like, I want to see that fight, because apparently governors like Abbott are willing to stand up.
Something that I've noticed just with the America Firsters quite a bit is there seems to be a bunch of championing going back towards like actually believing in the 10th Amendment and states' rights again. Because like we all get, super butthurt about free speech, like the First Amendment or the Second Amendment are falling apart in this country. But like the amendment that's really fallen apart is the 10th Amendment. And it was even something in the Trump speech to the libertarians is that I'm a champion of the 10th Amendment and, all this stuff, right?
Well, in his Tim Pool interview, his defense is, I think this is actually kind of pretty solid. His defense of the whole COVID thing is like, hey, I'm a federalist. I let the states do whatever they want, and some states did a really good job, and some states didn't. And he blamed Republicans and Democrats. I mean, like, that's the best message.
I think that's the best, like, and especially to a libertarian audience, like the 10th Amendment is so critically important for I think for actually making the country function as it's supposed to.
Well, and just like look at the aftermath of COVID. Like now we have like organizations of like parents holding school boards accountable, and it's like I think the lesson was just that like local politics matter a lot, and like if your governor was really bad on COVID, like you moved out of the state.
Well, and we could see that. Like we could look at what was happening in New York versus what was happening here in Montana, and like we complain about what was happening here in Montana, but it really was nothing like in comparison to these other states and how bad they handled it. Like people are getting like $10,000 fines and things like that in New York. It's crazy.
Yeah.
In my home country of Canada, like police were showing up at people's houses if they had too many cars in front of the house. Like it was, nutty.
Well, that's the reason that our vice chair, Melissa Wong, became a libertarian. She was a leftist, and during COVID, like some health official came up to her door and asked if anyone was in there that shouldn't be. And she's like, all right, we're leaving. We're moving to Montana.
Yep.
And she tuned into Clint Russell show and became a libertarian.
That's incredible.
All right, let's close this thing out, Joe.
Let's close it out.
Tell.
Well, Liam,
it's good message, man.
No, I'm not antsy. I'm not antsy. I'm loving it, but I know that it's probably just Adam Thune and a couple of other crazies that are still tuning at this point.
Love you guys.
We love you guys, and we really do. Liam, we love you, and we appreciate everything that you're doing for this movement, for the party. You're incredibly influential. That is only going to increase over time, and we're excited to see you grow and also to have you be a more regular part of this show. So
I appreciate it.
Lots to do there, and we're looking forward to it. Liam, where can people find you online?
So follow me. I'm most active on Twitter at Liam McCollum. I am also on YouTube. I think that's where I have the most amount of followers at the Liam McCollum Show. You can also find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other podcatchers. But yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us.
I would also say go to defendtheguard.us or bringourtroopshome.us and sign up. And please volunteer with me next year.
Fantastic. Thank you guys for tuning in. On behalf of David Rand, Kyle Mack, and Bennett, my name is Joe Sheehan. Liam, thanks again. We'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com. And remember,
the message I'm getting right now is that democracy sucks. I mean, this is just a nightmare. Why can't someone just be dictator of this thing?